You step back through the winding corridors of time, the echoes of forgotten empires gently rising to meet you. Imagine the heavy velvet drapes, the hushed whispers of courtiers, and the immense weight of a crown. But this time that crown rests not on a seasoned monarch, but on the head of a child. You might picture ancient maps, faded and fragile, showing realms where power was inherited long before wisdom could bloom. We often overlook these brief, tender reigns, the forgotten kingdoms ruled by kings who were barely more than infants. Tonight, you are invited to wander through these quiet annals, to explore the world where tiny hands grappled with the fate of nations. Let us drift into the silent stories of these boy kings, their fleeting impact, and the profound questions they raise about power, guidance, and the surprising resilience of a realm led by a child. You stand at the threshold of a royal chamber, the air heavy with an impending transition. The echoes of resilience you might have considered for a realm led by a child all begin at this precise, momentous, and often terrifying instant. You can almost feel the chill seeping from the stone walls, the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down. Here, power is not earned through battle or wisdom, but inherited, a solemn burden passed through the fragile thread of lineage. Imagine the scene. A king has died, perhaps suddenly, perhaps after a long drawn-out illness, leaving behind a kingdom in mourning and a throne unexpectedly vacant. The successor, by the strict dictates of primogeniture, is revealed. Not a seasoned warrior or a wise elder, but a child, perhaps still swaddled in silk, perhaps barely able to utter a handful of words. You hear the hushed whispers of courtiers, the rustle of their elaborate gowns as they crane their necks, their faces a mixture of solemnity and barely concealed ambition. The crown, often an ornate circlet of gold and jewels, far too large and heavy for such a small head, is presented. You can almost see the glint of the candlelight on its precious stones, reflecting the anxious eyes of those gathered. This is the crucible, the very beginning of a reign that defies all conventional logic. It is the moment the immense responsibility for an entire people, for its laws, its defense, its very future, is symbolically laid upon a human being who has not yet learned to walk or even to feed himself. Why would a kingdom subject itself to such a precarious arrangement? You trace it back to the absolute necessity of dynastic continuity. The bloodline was everything. It was the perceived divine right, the unbroken chain stretching back to legendary founders, that legitimized rule. To deviate, to choose an adult relative or a powerful general, was to risk civil war, to invite challenges to the very foundation of the realm. So the infant, innocent and vulnerable became the unbreakable link, the living symbol of legitimacy. With the child comes the regent. You see them step forward, often the child's mother, a formidable queen dowager, or a powerful uncle, sometimes an assembly of influential nobles or a high-ranking cleric. Their role is to rule for the child, to be the voice and the hand of authority until the boy king comes of age. But you also sense the subtle shift in the air, the delicate balance of power immediately made unstable. The regent, initially a steward, quickly becomes the de facto ruler, wielding the king's authority, collecting his revenues, leading his armies. And you know instinctively that this is where the true dangers lie. The court transforms into a stage for relentless intrigue. You move through the throngs of courtiers, feeling the tension, observing the knowing glances. Factions begin to form, aligning themselves with different regents, different power brokers. Each advisor, each general, each landowner now sees an opportunity. They whisper promises into the ears of the queen mother, or scheme with a rival uncle. They seek to gain control over the young king's education, his future marriage, his very household, knowing that influencing the boy is tantamount to controlling the kingdom itself. Imagine the daily realities. Decrees are issued in the infant king's name, treaties signed, wars declared. His small hand might be guided by a regent to press a royal seal onto a document, a symbolic act that holds the full weight of royal authority. You watch as elaborate ceremonies unfold, carefully choreographed to project stability and strength, even as the true power struggles simmer beneath the surface. The child is paraded before the populace, a tiny figure in oversized robes, a tangible embodiment of the kingdom's enduring spirit, a silent promise of future rule. But you also recognize the profound vulnerability inherent in this situation. The infant king is a precious, fragile commodity. His health is paramount. A sudden illness, a cough that lingers too long, can send a wave of terror through the court. Assassination plots are not unheard of, with ambitious relatives or rival factions attempting to remove the child and seize power directly. You perceive the constant, unspoken vigilance, the layers of guards, the carefully chosen wet nurses and tutors, all designed to protect this tiny living conduit of power. The very idea of an infant king, a sovereign unable to speak or reason, forces you to confront the true nature of kingship in these ancient realms. Was it truly about the individual on the throne, or was it about the institution itself, the concept of monarchy, the continuity of the state, that truly held the power? The child became a vessel, a sacred container for the abstract notion of kingship, allowing the machinery of government to continue, even when its head was literally still learning to lift its own head. You realize this was not an isolated phenomenon, a mere historical curiosity. Across millennia, in diverse civilizations from ancient Egypt and the Roman Empire to medieval Europe and the kingdoms of Asia, this pattern repeated itself. The throne, that most formidable seat of authority, often found its temporary occupant in the form of a bewildered, helpless child. It speaks volumes about the human obsession with lineage, the desperate measures taken to preserve order, and the enduring, often perilous, journey of power itself. This cradle of crowns, where power began in infancy, laid the groundwork for countless stories of manipulation, loyalty, and the surprising resilience of realms navigating the most fragile of reigns. You stand at the threshold of this peculiar reality, where the tender years of childhood collided with the colossal demands of the state. Imagine yourself as one of these children. Not just the abstract idea of a king, but a living, breathing, vulnerable human being, barely out of the nursery, suddenly thrust into the very center of a world teeming with adults, intrigue, and immense responsibility. Picture it. You are perhaps 3 years old. Or 5. Maybe 9. Your hands, still chubby, still learning to grip a spoon properly, are now expected to hold a scepter, a symbol of absolute power. That scepter is often surprisingly heavy, cold to the touch, intricately carved. It feels alien in your grasp, a foreign object designed for an adult's strength, not a child's tentative hold. You find yourself in a throne room. The sheer scale of it is overwhelming. High ceilings disappear into shadows, supported by massive columns that seem to scrape the heavens. Tapestries depicting scenes of war or ancient myths hang from the walls, their faded colors telling stories you are too young to understand, yet somehow, you are now part of their grand narrative. Your footsteps, small and uncertain, echo unnervingly across the polished stone floor. Every sound feels amplified. The hushed whispers of courtiers gathered around, the soft rustle of their rich garments, the distant clatter from the kitchens or stables, all converge into a symphony of alien noises. The air itself feels different in these royal chambers. Perhaps it carries the scent of stale incense from morning rituals, mixed with the fragrance of expensive perfumes worn by your guardians, and an underlying scent of aged parchment from the endless documents that define your reign. You are dressed in clothes that are far too elaborate for comfort. Layers of heavy silk, stiff brocade, and velvet constrain your movements. The weight of your formal attire alone can be exhausting. A crown, perhaps, rests precariously on your head, its gold and jewels cool against your scalp, its weight a constant, dull pressure. This is not a toy. This is the very emblem of your sacred, crushing duty. Your days are no longer filled with childish games. The simple joys of running through gardens, chasing butterflies, or inventing imaginary worlds are replaced by an unyielding schedule. From dawn until dusk, you are a student, a figurehead, and a spectacle. Tutors, stern-faced and unsmiling, stand over you. They demand you master Latin, Greek, history, theology, military strategy, law, and the complex genealogies of allied and rival houses. You learn the intricate dance of court etiquette, the proper way to receive ambassadors, the precise words to use in official decrees. Every gesture, every facial expression, every breath you take is scrutinized, corrected, molded. You are taught to read documents you cannot fully comprehend, to sign treaties whose implications are a mystery. Your signature, perhaps a wobbly, still-forming scrawl, holds the power of life and death, of war and peace for millions of people. Think of the immense psychological toll. To be surrounded by adults who treat you with exaggerated deference one moment, then scold you for fidgeting the next. To be told you are divine, chosen by God, while simultaneously being reminded that you are just a child, easily manipulated. This is a world without true peers. Your siblings, if you have them, are often rivals or pawns in a larger game. Other children your age are subjects, kept at a distance, their innocence a stark contrast to your burdened existence. You are isolated, a gilded bird in a gilded cage. Loneliness becomes a constant companion, echoing in the vast, empty rooms of your palace. Who can you trust? Everyone around you has an agenda. Every smile might hide a calculation. Every kind word could be a step towards gaining influence over your fragile person. The regent, typically an adult relative or a powerful noble, steps into the vacuum of your inexperience. They are the true power, the hand that guides the scepter you merely hold. Sometimes this regent is a loyal, protective figure, genuinely dedicated to the stability of the kingdom and your well-being. They might shield you from the uglier aspects of power, striving to give you some semblance of a childhood while preparing you for your future responsibilities. Think of the truly selfless regent who navigates treacherous political waters, taking the brunt of criticism and making difficult decisions, all to preserve the crown for its rightful young owner. But often the regent is ambitious, seeing your tender age as an opportunity. Your vulnerability becomes their strength. They control access to you, dictate your education, shape your worldview, and make decisions in your name, slowly consolidating their own power. You become a puppet, a voice box for their commands, your royal presence merely lending legitimacy to their rule. Whispers might reach your ears, dark rumors about your regent's true intentions, about lands being seized, about rival factions being purged. But what can you do? You are a child, dependent on those very same powerful adults. Consider the child who witnesses plotting and betrayal firsthand. Imagine overhearing hushed conversations behind closed doors, seeing the sudden disappearance of a favored advisor, or the wary glances exchanged between courtiers. You are too young to fully grasp the intricate web of alliances and enmities, but you feel the tension, the unspoken threats, the chilling undercurrent of danger. Your instincts, perhaps still sharp with childhood clarity, tell you that your life, and the lives of those you care about, are constantly at stake. The weight of the crown is not just physical. It is the weight of expectation, the pressure of dynasty, the burden of a nation's fate resting upon shoulders barely strong enough to carry a backpack. You are a symbol, a living embodiment of the state, and that symbolism must be maintained, even if it means sacrificing your personal desires, your natural curiosity, your very identity as a child. Take for example the young King Tutankhamun of ancient Egypt. He ascended the throne around the age of 9. Imagine him, a boy, navigating the complex religious and political shifts initiated by his father Akhenaten. The powerful priests, the influential generals, the bustling court of Thebes. He was the golden image, the living God, but his decisions, his decrees, were undoubtedly guided by powerful advisors like Horemheb. His life, short and impactful, was not his own. It was a performance, a duty to the gods and to Egypt. Or picture the boy King Edward VI of England, barely 9 years old when he inherited a volatile kingdom grappling with the Protestant Reformation. His uncles, first Edward Seymour, then John Dudley, served as Lord Protector, wielding immense power in his name. Edward, though precociously intelligent and devout, was still a child. His diet, his education, his daily routines were meticulously controlled. He was taught to believe in the righteousness of the Protestant cause, surrounded by men who championed it. His youth made him a potent, albeit unwitting, tool in the religious and political struggles that defined his brief reign. In France, Louis XIV became king at the tender age of 5. 4 years, the formidable Cardinal Mazarin, guided by the young king's mother and of Austria, held the reins of power. Louis spent his childhood learning the ropes of kingship, observing the maneuvers of his regent, and enduring the chaos of the Fronde, a series of civil wars that deeply scarred him and shaped his later, absolute rule. He grew up in the shadow of war and rebellion, a child king experiencing the fragility of his own position. He saw firsthand how close his throne came to collapsing. Even in the most stable of reigns, the experience of a child king was marked by an accelerated maturity, a forced understanding of the harsh realities of power. You learn quickly that tears are a weakness, that open displays of emotion are dangerous. You learn to observe, to listen, to read the subtle cues of court intrigue. You develop a protective shell, a facade of regal composure, even as your inner world remains that of a child longing for simplicity and genuine affection. The weight of the scepter, the chill of the crown, the echo of your own footsteps in the vast empty halls. This is the child's world, magnified and distorted by the immense gravity of kingship. You are a vessel for continuity, a symbol of order, but within that symbol resides a solitary heart, grappling with the incredible burden of a destiny not of its own choosing. Your playthings are replaced by state documents. Your games are replaced by political maneuvers. Your innocence is slowly, irrevocably, eroded by the constant pressures of a realm that expects everything from its smallest ruler. The very air you breathe is thick with expectation, with the hopes and fears of millions, all fixed upon your tiny crowned head. This is the paradoxical existence of the child king, a poignant intersection of innocence and absolute authority. Yet even a king, no matter how tiny, cannot rule in a vacuum. The very paradox you inhabit demands a solution, a proxy hand to guide the kingdom until your own can grasp the reins of power. This is where the shadow begins to lengthen, where the nursery throne casts its deepest, most intricate political patterns. You are the king, yes, but you are also the centerpiece of a grand, often dangerous, play orchestrated by others. You are the sun around which powerful planets orbit, each with their own gravitational pull, their own secret agendas. The stage is set for the regent. Imagine yourself as a child, perhaps barely old enough to string together full sentences, seated upon a throne far too large, your feet dangling high above the polished stone floor. Around you, the murmur of the court, a sea of faces, all looking to you, yet none truly expecting you to speak. Your voice is not the voice that governs. Your decrees are not the words that shape the realm. Instead, there is another, a regent. This figure steps into the immense void left by your youth, becoming the acting ruler, the protector of the realm, and often, the silent puppeteer of your own existence. Who is this regent? Often, it is your mother, the Queen Dowager, her heart perhaps torn between the fierce love for her child and the even fiercer necessity of preserving her family's legacy and the stability of the kingdom. She might be a woman of immense will, schooled in the intricacies of court politics, or perhaps a gentle soul suddenly thrust into a crucible of power. Or it could be an uncle, a powerful duke, a council of prominent nobles, even a high-ranking cleric. Each type of regent brings their own set of skills, their own ambitions, and their own potential for both great good and profound mischief. You watch them from the corner of your eye, a small, observant presence in a world of towering adults. You hear their hushed conversations, the rustle of their rich garments, the clinking of their keys and chains of office. You see the parchment scrolls they pore over, the maps they trace with their fingers, the worried expressions that cross their faces as they discuss rebellions, famines, or the shifting allegiances of distant lords. They are your teachers, your guardians, and perhaps your jailers. From your perspective, the regent is a giant, a figure of immense authority who stands between you and the full power of your birthright. They make the decisions. They sign the documents. They command the armies. They meet the ambassadors. You are present, of course. You must be. Your presence lends legitimacy, a constant reminder to the court and to the world that there is indeed a king, that the bloodline endures, that the realm has a true sovereign, even if that sovereign is still learning to tie their own shoelaces. You are a symbol, a living flag, a silent mascot for the real power at play. The air around the regent is thick with unspoken tension, a constant dance of ambition and loyalty. Every decision they make is scrutinized, every action questioned by rival factions eager to undermine their authority. For you, the child king, this means a childhood spent in an environment of perpetual suspicion. You learn early on that words have weight, that glances can convey entire conspiracies, that smiles can mask treachery. Your tutors might teach you Latin and history, but your true education comes from observing the intricate, often brutal, ballet of power that unfolds daily around the regent. Consider the Queen Mother, for example. She holds you close, perhaps whispering endearments, stroking your hair. But in the next breath, she is dictating letters of state, managing the royal treasury, or negotiating a marriage alliance that will shape the future of your kingdom. Her love for you is undeniable, yet it is often intertwined with a fierce, almost primal, need to protect your throne, and by extension, her own position and the future of her lineage. Her guidance can be a comfort, a steady hand. But it can also be a smothering blanket, preventing you from ever truly understanding the world outside your nursery-turned-palace. Then there are the ambitious uncles or powerful nobles. Their motives are often far less pure. They see you, the small king, not as a child to be nurtured but as a stepping stone, a temporary placeholder. They might treat you with outward deference, bowing low, speaking with honeyed words. But beneath the surface, a dangerous game is being played. They might manipulate your innocence, feeding you carefully curated information, shaping your perceptions of those who oppose them. They might try to instill loyalty to themselves, rather than to the crown you are meant to embody. Your young mind becomes a battlefield, a prize to be won by competing factions, each whispering their version of truth into your ears. You might find yourself surrounded by tutors carefully chosen by the regent, not always for their wisdom but for their loyalty. Your companions might be the regent's own children or the offspring of their allies, creating a carefully controlled social circle designed to reinforce the regent's influence. Every book you read, every lesson you learn, every person you interact with, is filtered through the regent's agenda. You become acutely aware of the invisible strings attached to every aspect of your life. The throne room itself becomes a classroom of a different kind. You sit there, a silent witness to the endless petitions, the diplomatic exchanges, the legal disputes. You listen to the regent's pronouncements, their confident tones, their decisive commands. You absorb, like a sponge, the rhythm and language of power. You learn how to carry yourself, how to maintain a stoic expression, how to appear attentive even when your mind wanders to less weighty matters, like the toy soldiers you left abandoned in your chamber. The weight of the crown may not be on your head yet, but the weight of expectation, of history, and of your future role, presses down on you relentlessly. This constant observation, this forced maturity, can breed two very different outcomes. Some child kings, accustomed to being a puppet, develop a deep-seated resentment, a simmering desire to break free and assert their own will. They learn to be cunning, to hide their true thoughts, to play their own game of observation and manipulation. Others, overwhelmed by the burden, become overly reliant on their regent, never fully developing the confidence or the capacity for independent rule. They remain royal puppets even after their coming of age, their decisions still shaped by the echoes of their regent's voice. The period of regency is inherently unstable. It is a time when the kingdom holds its breath. A regent, no matter how capable, can never possess the same unassailable legitimacy as a divinely appointed monarch. Their power is borrowed, temporary, and therefore constantly challenged. Rebellions are more likely to erupt. Border skirmishes can escalate into full-blown wars as neighboring powers sense weakness. The regent must constantly balance protecting the kingdom with protecting their own position, often at great personal cost. They are caught between the demands of the nobility, the needs of the common people, and the ever-present shadow of the young king who will one day inevitably come of age. And this coming of age is the critical moment, the great turning point. For you, the child king, it is the day you have been anticipating, perhaps dreading your entire life. The day when the invisible strings are meant to be cut, when the regent is supposed to step aside and cede the power back to its rightful owner. This transition is rarely smooth. The regent, having tasted the intoxicating elixir of power, may be reluctant to relinquish it. Years of managing the kingdom, of making difficult decisions, of wielding absolute authority, create a powerful inertia. They might genuinely believe that you, the young king, are not yet ready, that you are too inexperienced, too easily swayed, too immature to govern effectively. This belief, whether genuine or a convenient excuse, can lead to direct conflict. You, now a young man or woman, no longer a child, feel the stirrings of your own ambition, your own desire for control. You have observed, you have learned, and now you want to rule. The court divides, factions forming around the eager young monarch and the entrenched regent. Whispers turn into open challenges. Loyalties are tested. It can lead to power struggles, coups, even civil wars. History is replete with tales of young kings struggling to pry the reins of power from the hands of their former guardians, sometimes successfully, sometimes tragically. Imagine the tension in those final years of regency. You are 17, perhaps 18, the age when you are legally permitted to rule. The regent still presides over the council, still issues the edicts, still holds the keys to the treasury. You sit beside them, feeling the burning desire to intervene, to speak your own mind, to assert your own authority. But years of deference, years of being the silent observer, are hard to break. The very act of challenging your regent, the person who has guided your life, is a monumental undertaking fraught with peril. Sometimes the regent steps aside gracefully, having genuinely served the kingdom and groomed you for your role. They might retire to their estates, having secured their legacy and the future of their family. This is the ideal, the peaceful transition that ensures stability. But more often, the transition is a test of wills, a delicate dance of negotiation, threats, and sometimes outright confrontation. The legacy of a regency can shape an entire reign. A wise and benevolent regent can lay a strong foundation for your rule, teaching you the skills of governance, introducing you to the key figures of the court, and ensuring the kingdom is stable when you take full control. You might look back on your regent with gratitude, remembering their guidance and protection. But a manipulative or overly ambitious regent can leave deep scars. You might inherit a kingdom riddled with factions loyal to your former guardian, a treasury emptied by their excesses, or a populace resentful of their heavy-handed rule. More profoundly, you might emerge from your regency with a deep distrust of those around you, a constant suspicion of motives, an inability to form genuine bonds. The psychological impact of being a royal puppet, of having your childhood and early youth directed by another, can be immense. You might struggle to find your own voice, to assert your own identity, and to truly lead. You, the child king, are destined for the throne, yet your path to it is paved by the decisions and ambitions of others. You are a king in name, a powerful symbol, but for many years, you exist in the shadow of the nursery throne, a puppet whose strings are pulled by unseen hands. The regency is a necessary evil, a fragile bridge between the past and the future, a period of profound vulnerability and intense political maneuvering, all centered around your small, silent figure. It is a testament to the enduring power of kingship, even when that power resides in the most innocent of hands. You are no longer a mere symbol, a silent figure in the nursery throne. The crown, perhaps too large for your head, is now officially yours. The regency, that long period of tutelage and hidden power struggles, has technically ended. You have ascended. You are king or queen in your own right. Yet, this glimmer of gold, this moment of sovereign power, often proves fleeting. Your actual reign, the time you spend truly at the helm of your kingdom, can be a tragically brief candle flame, easily extinguished by the harsh winds of history. You feel the weight of the crown, not just physically but as a mantle of responsibility, a burden often too heavy for young shoulders. But even more profound is the precariousness of your position. For many child kings, the journey from infancy to independent rule was fraught with peril, and the actual period of self-governance offered little more stability. Indeed, for some, the greatest danger began the moment they declared themselves fully in charge. Consider the sheer fragility of life in your era. You grow up in a world where disease stalks every household, where a simple fever or a stomach ailment can swiftly claim a life. You are a child, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, perhaps a young man or woman in your late teens, but still susceptible to the invisible threats that modern medicine has long since conquered. The grand, drafty halls of your palace, while impressive, offer little protection against the chill, the damp, the contagion that can sweep through a crowded court. One day you are overseeing a council, listening to reports from your generals, perhaps signing a decree. The next, you are confined to your chambers, a persistent cough racking your chest, your skin burning with fever. The royal physicians, with their limited knowledge and crude remedies, do their best. They bleed you. They administer strange concoctions. But often it is not enough. You lie there, fading, the bustling court outside your door suddenly silent, holding its breath. And then, silence indeed. Your brief moment, your glimmer of gold, extinguished. Your reign a mere footnote. You're passing a new opportunity for ambitious relatives, a fresh crisis for the kingdom. You might be buried with great pomp and ceremony, a state funeral befitting a monarch, even one who ruled for only a handful of years. But the real legacy? It is often one of unfulfilled promise, a blank page in the ledger of history. Your name might be remembered, but your deeds are few, your policies largely those of your former regents, or simply lost in the tumult that invariably follows a sudden death. Your footsteps, once poised to stride across the stage of your kingdom, fade into the dust of time, leaving barely an impression. But illness is only one foe. More insidious, more cunning, and perhaps more common, is the human element, the ambition of others. You have spent your entire life surrounded by people who claim loyalty, who bow and scrape, who offer advice. But you are a king and a young one, and that makes you a target. The very regents who supposedly nurtured you through your minority might now see you as an impediment. They have tasted power. They have ruled in your name. They have built their own networks, their own factions. To surrender that power to a young, inexperienced monarch might seem foolish, even dangerous to them. You might sense the shift in the air, the subtle change in their deference. The whispers grow louder, the glances sharper. You issue an order, and it is questioned, delayed, perhaps even subtly undermined. You try to assert your authority, to make your own mark, to step out of the long shadow of your regent. But their roots are deep. Their allies are many. And your experience is scant. One night, you might hear unusual sounds outside your bedchamber. The clanking of armor that is not your guards. The hushed, urgent voices. You feel a cold dread seep into your bones. The door bursts open. Faces you once knew, faces you once trusted, now hardened by purpose, fill the entryway. They seize you. Perhaps you are dragged from your bed, protesting, calling for help that will not come. Perhaps you are given a swift, brutal end, your short reign concluding in a sudden, violent gasp. Or perhaps you are imprisoned, deposed, forced to abdicate, replaced by a more pliable relative, or even by your former regent, who now claims the throne outright. Your reign ends not with a whimper, but with a coup, a calculated act of treachery. You are swept away, your name erased from official records. your image defaced from coins and monuments. Your existence becomes an inconvenient truth, a ghost in the palace halls. Your fleeting moment on the throne, that glimmer of gold, becomes a dark stain on the history books, a cautionary tale of a child who dared to rule, only to be consumed by the very power he inherited. Your footprints here are not merely fading. They are actively being scrubbed away, intentionally obliterated by those who wish to forget you ever existed. Beyond these personal dangers, you, the child king, often find yourself at the epicenter of wider, systemic instabilities. Your kingdom is not an island. It is part of a complex tapestry of alliances and rivalries, always susceptible to external pressures. A king's minority is often seen as a moment of weakness, an opportune time for rival kingdoms to press their claims, to invade disputed territories, to ignite long-simmering conflicts. You sit in council listening to reports of border raids, of encroaching armies. Your generals, often men of experience, but perhaps also men of ambition, advise you. The decisions fall to you, or rather to your regency council. But the very existence of a child on the throne can embolden enemies. They believe your kingdom is rudderless, that its defenses are weak, that its people are disunited. They might correctly perceive that your advisors are more concerned with their own power struggles than with the unified defense of the realm. You might witness your kingdom shrink, piece by piece, as lands are lost in disastrous wars. Treaties signed under duress. Treasury drained by prolonged conflict. Your people suffer. Your authority, already fragile, erodes further with each defeat. You might eventually be forced to flee your capital, a child refugee from a throne you barely occupied. Your kingdom might even fracture, splintering into smaller, independent states, each vying for power, leaving you with nothing but a title, an empty claim to a realm that no longer exists in its former glory. In such scenarios, your reign, short as it may be, is not remembered for your accomplishments, for there were none of your own. Instead, it is remembered as a period of national decline, a time of chaos and loss. Your footprints are not those of a monarch who shaped destiny, but rather of a witness to its unraveling. Your name might be synonymous with catastrophe, not leadership. Even if you survive disease, if you successfully navigate the treacherous currents of court intrigue, and if your kingdom sustains external threats, another challenge looms for the child king, the challenge of making a lasting mark. What kind of legacy can a monarch leave when their true period of self-rule is so brief, so dominated by the actions of others? You finally come of age. The regency is officially over. You are now truly the king. But you have spent years, perhaps more than a decade, having decisions made for you. Your personality has been shaped by those around you, your education geared towards an ideal of kingship that may not align with your true self. You might be hesitant, indecisive, or perhaps overly aggressive in your newfound autonomy, trying to overcompensate for years of subjugation. Your own policies, your own vision for the kingdom, might be limited to a few years before fate intervenes. You might initiate a grand building project, sponsor a new law, or lead a military campaign. But then an early death, or a sudden political reversal, or the relentless march of time, which ensures that your personal impact is quickly subsumed by the next ruler, the next crisis, the next shift in power. Consider the vast sweep of history. How many kings and queens rule for decades, their reigns filled with landmark events, their names forever etched into the national consciousness. Then consider your reign, perhaps a mere 3, 5, or 8 years of independent rule following a long regency. The time is simply not enough. Your court records might show a flurry of activity during your brief period of direct rule, but compare it to the annals of a long-reigning monarch. You simply cannot accumulate the same weight of deeds, the same depth of reforms, the same breadth of influence. Your glimmer of gold is too brief to cast a long shadow. The footprint you leave might be indistinct, blurred by the more prominent imprints of your regents, or by the more powerful figures who came before or after you. You might find that the grand cathedral built during your reign is actually attributed to the regent who initiated its construction. The successful military campaign is remembered as the victory of your general, not of the young king who nominally commanded him. You are a king, yes, but your identity is forever tied to your youth, to your minority. You are the child king, even when you are 25. This label, while perhaps sympathetic, also minimizes your achievements, framing them always within the context of your age and inexperience. It is a burden that few other monarchs bear. For countless forgotten kingdoms, and even for some celebrated ones, the reigns of child kings represent moments of profound vulnerability, periods where the future hung by a thread, and the concept of continuous, stable rule was an illusion. Their stories are not often told in the grand narratives of national triumph, but rather in the quiet desperation of palace intrigues, the solemn procession of premature funerals, or the abrupt silence after a coup. Their glimmer of gold was the crown itself, the symbolic power. But the reality of their fleeting reign meant that this gold often tarnished quickly, or was snatched away before it could truly shine. Their fading footprints are a somber reminder of how fragile power can be, how quickly even a monarch can be forgotten, especially when they are too young to forge their own indelible legacy. You walk through the phantom halls of these forgotten palaces. You see the spectral figures of child kings, their faces still boyish, their eyes wide with apprehension or perhaps a nascent understanding of their impossible position. You hear the echoes of their short lives, the hopes of their mothers, the machinations of their advisors, the clatter of swords in a midnight coup. Their reigns, often turbulent, brief and tragic, underscore a fundamental truth about monarchy. It thrives on stability, on continuity, and on the strength of a singular, mature will. When that will is unformed, when that stability is absent, when that continuity is broken by the tender age of the sovereign, the kingdom itself often suffers. The child king, a living embodiment of the state, a sacred vessel of continuity, paradoxically often becomes a catalyst for discontinuity. Their very presence on the throne, intended to bridge generations, too often became the very fissure through which chaos and destruction poured. And so their names, if remembered at all, are often spoken with a sigh, a shrug, or perhaps a morbid fascination for the dramatic circumstances of their fall. They are the monarchs who almost were, the leaders whose potential was never realized, the rulers whose names were overshadowed by their regents, their usurpers, or simply the swift, indifferent hand of fate. You consider their quiet despair, their isolation, their powerlessness in the face of immense forces, both human and natural. You reflect on the cruel irony of being born to rule, to hold the ultimate authority, only to find that your voice is unheard, your will is ignored, and your very existence is a pawn in a game played by adults. Their stories, though often relegated to the margins of history, are profound. They remind us that the glittering veneer of royalty often hid a harsher, more dangerous reality, especially for those innocent enough to be placed upon the throne too soon. These are the forgotten, the fleeting, the faintest impressions on the grand tapestry of human power. Their reigns, a mere flicker, a brief, vulnerable shine. Their legacy, a whispered name, a faded memory, lost in the shadows of greater, longer, and perhaps more brutal reigns. You turn from the image of a child king, alone in his grand chamber, the future of his kingdom resting uncertainly upon his small, innocent shoulders. The chill of the palace stone seems to seep into your own bones. You hear the distant sound of trumpets, perhaps announcing a new reign, perhaps a new rebellion. The cycle continues, often with another child, another symbol, another potential glimmer of gold, destined perhaps for yet another fleeting reign and another set of fading footprints. The trumpets may announce a new reign or a new rebellion, but their sound fades into the vast stone edifice you now inhabit. The chill of the palace stone, which just moments ago seemed to seep into your bones, now feels like a permanent resident in the air, a silent witness to centuries of secrets. You are no longer merely observing. You are standing within these very walls, feeling their cold, heavy presence. As twilight descends, a different kind of life stirs within the palace. The boisterous clamor of court business quiets. The rustle of 1,000 silks and the murmur of petitioners fade. You hear instead the soft scrape of a guard's boot on polished marble, the distant tinkle of a servant's bell, the hiss of a dying fire in a far-off hearth. These are the intimate sounds of a royal residence settling into its guarded slumber. Yet, for a child king, these hours of night are not for peaceful rest. They are often the most treacherous. Imagine yourself walking these hushed corridors. The flickering light of a single torch casts long dancing shadows that seem to twist into grotesque shapes on the ancient tapestries. Every creak of the floorboards, every whispered word exchanged behind a heavy oak door, takes on an amplified significance. You are in a place where power is not merely exercised in grand declarations, but is subtly woven into the very fabric of daily life, particularly when the true monarch is too young to command it. The greatest vulnerability of a child king lies not in the distant threats of invading armies or open rebellion, but in the insidious dangers that lurk within his own household, amongst those sworn to protect him. His greatest enemies often sleep just a few chambers away, or perhaps even share his meals. The palace, intended as a sanctuary, transforms into a gilded cage, a labyrinth of ambition and betrayal. You picture a sprawling bedchamber, opulent and vast, but ultimately isolating. A small figure lies nestled within voluminous silken sheets, perhaps clutching a favorite toy, dreaming the innocent dreams of childhood. This is the king. This fragile, dreaming child is the very heart of the kingdom, and around him, a silent, deadly ballet of power plays out. His youth is his greatest weakness, a vacuum into which eager hands and hungry minds will rush. Who truly holds the reins of power when a child sits upon the throne? It is the regent, of course. Sometimes this is a wise and loyal queen mother, deeply devoted to her son's well-being and the stability of the realm. Other times it is an ambitious uncle, a powerful noble, or even a council of ministers, each with their own agenda, their own faction, and their own vision for the kingdom's future, which may or may not include the child king's continued reign. You listen closely, trying to discern the true intentions behind the polite smiles and deferential bows you might have witnessed during the day. The court is a stage and everyone is an actor. During the king's infancy, the regent effectively holds all royal authority. This position is a magnet for power, for wealth, for influence. Imagine the temptation for someone who has tasted such absolute power to relinquish it when the child finally comes of age. What if that child, in growing up, proves to be willful or worse, begins to show signs of intellect and independence that challenge the regent's established authority? The whispers begin subtly. A favored advisor might suggest to the regent that the young king is not learning quickly enough, or that he shows a distressing lack of interest in matters of state. Another might plant seeds of doubt about the king's health or his temperament. These are not direct threats, not yet. They are the slow, steady erosion of a child's legitimacy, designed to prolong the regent's control. You can almost hear the soft rustle of parchment in a hidden study, the scratching of a quill as a secret letter is drafted, outlining a supposed conspiracy involving the child king's tutor, or perhaps a nursemaid. Accusations, often unfounded but expertly crafted, become potent weapons. A child's innocent misstep, a tantrum, a childish disobedience, can be twisted into evidence of instability, of unsuitability for rule. The most chilling aspect of these palace intrigues is their intimate nature. The greatest danger often comes not from a foreign army at the gates, but from the poisoned chalice offered by a seemingly loyal servant, or a sudden, mysterious illness that sweeps through the royal chambers. When a child king falls ill, suspicion blankets the court like a heavy shroud. Was it natural causes or was a subtle hand at play? The line between accident and assassination becomes impossibly blurred, especially in an era without advanced forensics. You feel a shiver despite the relative warmth of the chamber where you stand. The air itself feels heavy with unspoken threats. Think of the young heir, barely a toddler, who is suddenly elevated to the throne because his father died unexpectedly. His mother, the Queen Dowager, becomes regent. But what if her power is challenged by a powerful noble faction, perhaps led by the late king's younger brother, who himself has a claim to the throne? The child king becomes a pawn in a game of chess played by adults. He is moved and manipulated, his very existence a symbol for competing factions. Sometimes the goal is not to remove the child entirely, but to control him absolutely. To raise him within a carefully curated world, where his teachers, his playmates, even the stories he hears, are all designed to shape him into a monarch who will serve the interests of his controllers. He might grow up believing that his regent is the wisest, most benevolent figure in the kingdom, never realizing he is little more than a puppet. Imagine the isolated world of such a child. He is surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Every smile might hide a calculating mind. Every kind word might be a prelude to a demand. He cannot trust his closest companions, for they may be informants. He cannot speak freely, for his words could be twisted and used against him. Even his food and drink are suspect, often tasted by others before he is allowed to partake. This is not the carefree childhood of an ordinary child. It is a gilded prison, a constant performance of royalty, often without any real power. You can almost hear the soft tread of feet in the dead of night, outside the royal nursery. Is it a loyal guard or a plotter? Is it a loving nurse or an agent of someone with darker intentions? The very shadows seem to hold secrets. The heavy velvet curtains at the windows could conceal an assassin as easily as they keep out the morning light. Consider the role of the royal physician. A man of immense power and trust, yet also a potential instrument of intrigue. A concoction meant to soothe a fever could just as easily be laced with a slow-acting poison. A diagnosis of natural illness could mask a deliberate act. The physician's word, especially in matters concerning the king's health, was often beyond dispute, providing perfect cover for those who sought to shorten a child king's reign. The danger isn't always outright murder. Sometimes it is a campaign of character assassination, a slow erosion of a child's standing. Perhaps a young king is deliberately kept uneducated, his studies neglected, so that he will grow into an incapable ruler, easily managed. Or he might be encouraged to indulge in vices, to be surrounded by sycophants who lead him astray, making him unfit to rule when he finally reaches maturity. A weak king, easily swayed, is almost as good as no king at all for those who truly seek power. You feel the chill again, more profound now, as you consider the meticulous planning and cold determination required to orchestrate such long-term plots. These are not sudden, impulsive acts. They are intricate webs spun over years, sometimes decades, by individuals patient enough to wait for the opportune moment. The palace itself becomes a living, breathing entity full of hidden passages, secret listening posts, and hushed conversations that carry enormous weight. Think of the constant stress on the few truly loyal individuals surrounding a child king. A devoted tutor, a protective nursemaid, a trusted chamberlain. They walk a tightrope, knowing that any perceived mistake, any slight, any word out of place, could endanger their charge or themselves. They must be vigilant, discerning, and discreet, for even their loyalty could be twisted into a threat by those who seek to undermine the child king. Their own lives, often held in the palm of the powerful regent or the scheming courtiers, are constantly at risk. The walls themselves, if they could speak, would whisper tales of betrayal and survival, of hurried burials and unmarked graves within the palace grounds, of children spirited away in the dead of night, never to be seen again, of forged documents and hushed proclamations. The story of a child king is often less about grand battles and more about silent struggles for control, fought in the shadowed corridors and behind the closed doors of his home. As you stand here, surrounded by the echoes of these forgotten intrigues, you realize the true weight of the crown for a child. It is not just a symbol of power, it is a target, It is a burden that traps them, not only within the confines of the palace walls, but also within a web of political maneuvering from which there is often no escape. This is the hidden history, the one not often recorded in heroic sagas or chronicles of statecraft. This is the history of childhood stolen, of innocence exploited, of vulnerability weaponized. The palace, meant to protect the monarch, became the very crucible where their fate was forged, often with the cold, unforgiving hammer of adult ambition. The air thickens with the scent of old wood and the phantom odor of lamp oil. You imagine a small lamp burning low in a royal chamber, its light barely piercing the vast darkness, illuminating the face of a sleeping child. A child who, unbeknownst to him, is the focal point of a silent, deadly war for control. His dreams are perhaps of play and sunshine, while just beyond his door, the adults plot, scheme, and decide his destiny with every whispered word and every calculated move. This fragile life, this brief moment of youthful sleep, holds the precarious future of an entire kingdom in its delicate balance. The whispers will continue until dawn and perhaps long after. The whispers of the night may have settled into a tense quiet as dawn paints the horizon in hues of rose and gray. But for the child king, the end of one struggle for power simply heralds the beginning of another, far more insidious battle. The battle for his very mind and spirit. You might imagine that with the morning light comes the freedom of a child's day, a moment to escape the adult world of plots and stratagems. But here, within these ancient walls, childhood is a luxury that cannot be afforded, a vulnerability that must be ruthlessly trained out. Instead of the simple joys of play, your day is structured around an education unlike any other, a curriculum designed not for learning but for reigning. From the moment your eyes open, the palace itself transforms into a vast, demanding classroom, every interaction a lesson, every game a strategic exercise. You are not merely a child. You are the future of a kingdom, and your upbringing reflects this crushing weight. Your tutors, carefully selected by powerful regents, are not kindly scholars eager to impart wisdom. They are often grizzled generals, astute diplomats, and devout priests, each with their own vision for your reign, and their own place in the hierarchy to protect. They are your constant companions, your shadows, and your relentless taskmasters. Imagine your first lessons. They begin not with stories of heroes, but with the detailed lineage of your ancestors, the triumphs and failures of your royal house. You trace the complex family trees, not as a casual pastime, but as a map of alliances and betrayals, a critical guide to who you can trust and who you must guard against. You learn the history of your kingdom not as a collection of quaint tales, but as a brutal record of wars won and lost, territories gained and ceded, and the endless, cyclical struggle for power. Every victory is a blueprint for your own future campaigns. Every defeat a solemn warning. Your mornings are often spent poring over ancient texts, deciphering laws that have governed your people for centuries. You are taught the intricacies of jurisprudence, the nuances of treaties, and the art of decree. These are not abstract concepts. You feel the weight of these words, knowing that one day your own signature will bring them to life or consign them to dust. The scribes who guide your hand are meticulous, their patience as thin as the parchment before you, for any error could have grave consequences. You learn to speak multiple languages not for travel or leisure, but for diplomacy, for understanding the threats and opportunities lurking beyond your borders. Each foreign tongue is a key to unlocking the intentions of rivals and allies alike. But the classroom is not confined to dusty scrolls and hushed libraries. Your afternoons might see you in the bustling court, a small figure perched on a throne too large, observing the endless procession of petitioners, ambassadors, and courtiers. You are taught to watch, to listen, to discern the truth from the flattery, the genuine plea from the veiled ambition. Your regents, seated beside you, whisper explanations, pointing out the subtle cues in a diplomat's bow or a courtier's smile. This is an education in human nature, a crash course in political psychology, where every face is a lesson and every conversation a test. You learn the delicate dance of protocol, the precise timing of a nod, the strategic deployment of a smile, the power of silence. And what of playtime? Did these child kings ever truly play? Yes, but even their games were meticulously crafted extensions of their education. You might be given a set of intricately carved wooden figures, not for a simple story, but to recreate famous battles, planning troop movements, flanking maneuvers, and siege tactics on a miniature scale. The tutor observes, not for enjoyment but for your strategic aptitude, your ability to command and adapt. The consequences of your tiny wooden army's defeat are not real, of course, but the lessons in leadership, in risk assessment, in the cold logic of war, are very real indeed. Imagine yourself on horseback, not for a leisurely ride, but for a hunt, accompanied by experienced generals and courtiers. The pursuit of the stag becomes a metaphor for military strategy. You learn to ride with skill and courage, to wield a spear, to lead a party, to make quick decisions in the face of danger. The thrill of the chase, the rush of adrenaline, teaches you about facing fear, about perseverance, and about the importance of a coordinated effort. Every successful hunt reinforces your growing image as a capable leader, a future commander. Every arrow loosed, every challenge overcome, is a calculated step towards embodying the king you are destined to become. You are taught the art of rhetoric and oratory, not to entertain, but to inspire your troops, to sway your council, to pacify a rebellious populace. Standing before a mirror, or perhaps a stern tutor, you practice delivering pronouncements, adjusting your posture, your tone, your gaze. The words you speak must carry the weight of your office, even if your voice has not yet fully broken. You learn to project authority, to command attention, to articulate your will with clarity and conviction. Even your spiritual education is steeped in policy. Priests instruct you in the sacred rituals, the ancient prayers, and the divine right that legitimizes your rule. You understand that your connection to the gods is not just personal piety, it is a cornerstone of your power. Your faith is a tool, a symbol, a bond with your people. You attend elaborate ceremonies, endure long fasts, and participate in complex rites, all designed to reinforce your sacred role and demonstrate your devotion, not only to the divine but also to the stability of your kingdom. Through these years, your childhood slowly erodes, replaced by the hardening shell of kingship. The innocent curiosity of a child gives way to the strategic thinking of a monarch. Your emotional responses are observed, analyzed, and often suppressed. A king cannot afford to show weakness, cannot afford the luxury of simple joy or unbridled sorrow in public. Every emotion must be carefully managed, every reaction measured for its political impact. You are constantly reminded that your personal feelings are secondary to the needs of the state. The transition from playtime to policy is not a sudden leap, but a gradual, relentless shaping. The stories of child kings show us this painful evolution. These boys and girls, burdened with crowns too heavy for their young heads, were robbed of their carefree years, transformed into instruments of state long before they understood the full gravity of their position. Their tutors, their games, their very lives were all part of a grand, often brutal, design. They were not merely learning to rule, they were being forged into rulers, their wills bent, their spirits tempered, their innocence sacrificed on the altar of royal duty and the relentless machinations of those around them. The forgotten kingdoms they ruled may have faded into the mists of time, but the echoes of their extraordinary childhoods, spent navigating a world where every lesson was a strategic maneuver and every game a rehearsal for power, resonate still. They remind us that even in the most revered positions, the human cost of leadership can be immense, particularly for those whose reign began before their childhood truly ended. You stand now on the precipice of a new, darker aspect of our journey into the forgotten reigns of child kings. If their early years were a crucible of intense education and relentless preparation, they were also a constant dance with danger, a perilous tightrope walk above a pit of ambition and betrayal. The moment an infant or a young child inherited a throne, the very stability of the kingdom often wavered, for a child king was not a ruler in the traditional sense. He was a symbol, an empty vessel waiting to be filled, a crown waiting to be claimed, and a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Imagine yourself in the echoing stone halls of a medieval castle, the chill seeping into your bones even in the bright afternoon sun. The air is thick with unspoken intentions. You see a boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, adorned in silks and jewels, sitting upon a massive carved throne, his small feet dangling far above the floor. He might be playing with a wooden toy, his attention momentarily diverted from the hushed conversations of the adults around him. This boy, by divine right and the bloodline of his ancestors, is king. Yet, in truth, he is little more than a puppet, a figurehead whose every breath, every action, every decree is dictated by the powerful hands pulling his strings. The immediate consequence of an innocent child ascending to the throne was the necessity of a regency. No kingdom could function without a guiding hand, and that hand could not belong to a minor. So, a regent was appointed, or more commonly, a regency council was formed. This was not a straightforward delegation of power, it was a furious, often brutal, scramble. Who would guide the king? Who would hold the reins of state until he came of age? The answers to these questions determined the immediate future of the realm and, critically, the future of the child himself. Consider the players in this deadly game. You have the child king's mother, often a queen dowager, desperate to protect her son and maintain her own influence. You have powerful uncles, ambitious cousins, seasoned dukes, and influential bishops, each believing themselves to be the rightful guardian of the realm, each seeing an opportunity to steer policy, enrich their families and solidify their own positions. These were not simply advisors. They were rivals, sometimes veiled, sometimes openly hostile, all circling the innocent crown like hungry wolves. The child king became the ultimate prize in a high-stakes political chess match. His well-being was secondary to the control he represented. If you could control the king, you controlled the kingdom. And how easy it was to control a child. Their natural trust, their lack of understanding of the Machiavellian world they inhabited, their dependence on adults for guidance and affection, all made them exquisitely vulnerable targets. You might find yourself walking through the private chambers of such a young monarch, observing his lessons. His tutors, carefully selected by the regent, might subtly indoctrinate him with ideas favorable to their patron. He might be isolated from those who could offer him alternative perspectives, his world meticulously curated to shape his opinions and loyalties. Whispers could fill his ears, sowing distrust against a rival faction, painting one relative as loyal and another as a threat. The child would grow up believing these manufactured truths, his own will slowly, imperceptibly, bend to serve the interests of those who protected him. But isolation and manipulation were merely the subtle instruments of control. More insidious and far more terrifying were the direct conspiracies aimed at removing the child king entirely. A live child, no matter how pliable, presented a potential future threat to those who held power. When he came of age, he might remember the slights, resent the control, or choose to rule independently, shattering the carefully constructed empires of his regents. For many ambitious individuals, the only truly safe child king was a dead child king. Think of the chilling, hushed conversations in shadowed corners, the clinking of files in the dead of night. Poison was a favored tool, subtle and difficult to trace. A sudden illness, a fever that lingered, a mysterious wasting sickness. These were often the official explanations for the premature demise of a young ruler who had become inconvenient. You would hear the official proclamations of grief, the elaborate funerals, but beneath the surface, the court would buzz with nervous speculation, knowing eyes meeting across crowded halls. Accidents, too, had a way of befalling child kings. A fall from a horse during a hunt, a misstep on a treacherous staircase, a sudden illness contracted during a royal tour. While some were undoubtedly genuine tragedies, the frequency with which young monarchs met such fates raises serious questions. You would observe the careful crafting of these narratives, the public display of sorrow, while behind closed doors, power shifted, new alliances were forged and the cycle of ambition continued. Consider the Byzantine Empire, a realm famously prone to intrigue and swift changes of power. You might recall Emperor Michael III, who became sole emperor at the tender age of 3 in the 9th century. His reign began under the regency of his mother, Theodora, and the eunuch Theoctistos. 4 years, these figures steered the empire, navigating external threats and internal factions. However, as Michael grew, he became increasingly resentful of their control. Ultimately, he allied himself with his uncle Bardas, orchestrating Theoctistos' assassination and sending his mother to a convent. The child, once a puppet, had learned to pull strings of his own, but only after years of being shaped and confined. His story, though leading to a violent assertion of power, highlights the initial vulnerability and the manipulative environment he endured. Or step further back into the ancient world of Egypt. You are walking through the sands of Amarna, contemplating the brief but impactful reign of Tutankhamun. He ascended to the throne around the age of 9, following the tumultuous rule of Akhenaten. His youth meant that real power lay in the hands of his senior advisors, particularly Ai and Horemheb. These men, experienced and cunning, guided the young pharaoh in restoring the traditional gods and dismantling his father's religious reforms. While not a direct conspiracy to kill in the way of a European court, it was a masterful exercise in controlling a child ruler to achieve specific political and religious goals. Tutankhamun's every decree, every public appearance, was orchestrated by these powerful figures. His youth was their opportunity to reverse a deeply unpopular religious revolution, using his innocent image as the face of a return to tradition. You can almost feel the weight of these advisors' expectations, the pressure on a young boy to perform a role far beyond his years, his true will obscured by the needs of the state and the ambitions of others. The usurpation of the throne was the most overt form of conspiracy. When a child king was perceived as too weak, too easily manipulated, or simply an obstacle to a more powerful claimant, direct action was often taken. You are standing in the Great Hall when news arrives of a powerful duke marching on the capital, claiming the child king is illegitimate or unfit to rule, or simply too young to command the respect of the realm. The arguments used to justify such a coup often centered on the perceived instability a child ruler brought, framing the usurper as a savior bringing order and strength. The most infamous example, one that still chills us to this day, involves Edward V of England and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, the Princes in the Tower. Edward ascended the throne at the age of 12 in 1483. His uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector. You can almost hear the nervous whispers among the court, the uneasy glances as Richard consolidated his power, isolating the young king and his brother, moving them into the Tower of London, ostensibly for their safety and preparation for the coronation. But the coronation never came. Instead, rumors began to circulate, propaganda questioning the legitimacy of Edward's birth. Soon, Richard of Gloucester himself claimed the crown as King Richard III. The boys were never seen again. Their fate remains one of history's most enduring mysteries, a chilling testament to the extreme vulnerability of child kings when faced with unchecked ambition. You feel the cold dread that must have settled upon those boys, locked away, their royal birthright turning into a cage, then perhaps a tomb, all because they were too young and too powerless to defend themselves. Even when outright murder or usurpation was not the goal, the struggle for control over a child king could be brutal. You might find yourself observing the daily routines of a young French monarch, like Louis XIII, who became king at age 9 in 1610. For the first 7 years of his reign, his mother, Marie de' Medici, ruled as regent. Her court was filled with favorites and ambitious ministers, all vying for influence, all shaping the young king's worldview. Louis, a quiet and often melancholic boy, grew up in the shadow of his powerful mother and her inner circle. He learned early to be suspicious, to observe, and to wait. When he finally asserted his independence at age 16, it was through a violent coup orchestrated by his own Grand Falconer, Charles d'Albert, Duke of Luynes, resulting in the assassination of his mother's favorite, Concino Concini. The child who was once controlled had learned to manipulate power with ruthless efficiency, but at what cost to his own psyche? You witnessed the transformation of an innocent boy into a calculating monarch, forged in the fires of courtly intrigue. The constant threat of conspiracy profoundly shaped these young rulers, even those who survived and eventually claimed their full authority. You can imagine the paranoia that must have settled deep within their souls. Whom could they trust? Every advisor, every friend, every family member could potentially be an enemy in waiting. Their childhoods, already devoid of true innocence, were further marred by an ever-present sense of danger, a feeling that their very existence was conditional. This bred caution, suspicion, and often a hardening of their hearts. For the child king, the world was a labyrinth of hidden motives and treacherous smiles. He might have been showered with gifts and praise, yet felt the chill of insincerity in every gesture. His life was a gilded cage, beautiful on the surface, but filled with unseen traps. You consider the weight of this burden, the psychological toll of growing up knowing that your life, your crown, your very identity, was a contested battleground for the ambitions of others. When a conspiracy succeeded, the consequences were often swift and devastating, not just for the child but for the entire kingdom. Legitimacy could be challenged, civil wars could erupt, and the stability of the realm could be shattered for decades. The throne, meant to be a symbol of enduring power, became instead a rotating prize, claimed and reclaimed through violence and deception. You see the ripples of these events extending through generations, altering the course of history based on the vulnerability of one small, innocent boy or girl. These vulnerable thrones then reveal a stark truth about power: it abhors a vacuum. And a child on the throne creates the most tempting vacuum of all. The innocent crown, rather than being a protective symbol, often served as a beacon for the most ruthless and calculating individuals. The stories of these child kings are not just tales of early responsibility, they are grim reminders of the relentless human craving for dominance, a hunger that saw no moral barrier in exploiting the youth and powerlessness of an innocent sovereign. You cannot help but feel a profound pity for these children, whose lives were not their own, whose destinies were woven into the complex and often deadly tapestries of courtly intrigue long before they could even comprehend the game. Their early years were not just a preparation for power, they were a battle for survival. You might imagine a child king as merely a figurehead, a puppet in the hands of powerful regents. Yet, the reality was far more complex, far more insidious, and often far more tragic. You stand in the shadow of a grand throne room, the air thick with the scent of aged tapestries and unspoken ambition. Before you, a small ornate chair, barely touched by the sun, waits for its occupant. On a dais too high for a child to climb unassisted, this chair symbolizes a paradox: immense power held by an innocent hand. When a monarch died leaving behind a minor heir, the clock started ticking. Not just for the funeral rites or the coronation, but for the ruthless scramble for influence that would define the coming years, sometimes even decades. This was the era of the regent, or more often, a regency council. These were not merely temporary caretakers. They were the de facto rulers, wielding the full authority of the crown, theoretically on behalf of the child, but practically, often for their own gain. Consider the vastness of the empires these children ostensibly controlled. From the sprawling reaches of ancient Egypt, through the intricate feudal systems of medieval Europe, to the mighty dynasties of China and India, these realms were complex machines of governance, war, and commerce. They demanded seasoned leadership, strategic vision, and an iron will. Instead, they received the guiding hand of proxy rulers, their authority often unstable, challenged by rival factions, and ultimately tethered to the fragile existence of a growing child. The choices made by these regents, or the young rulers once they reached an age of semi-competence, often determined the fate of millions. Think of it: grand foreign policies formulated, treaties signed or broken, wars declared, new laws enacted, all under the nominal sanction of a child who perhaps still played with wooden soldiers or learned to read their letters. These were decisions born not of a king's mature deliberation, but of a regent's often self-serving calculus, or an adolescent's developing sense of right and wrong, clouded by the immense pressures of their position. You feel the weight of this responsibility, an invisible cloak draped over even the smallest shoulders. The unripe judgment referred to in our title is not always an indictment of the child ruler themselves. More often, it speaks to the immaturity, the short-sightedness, or the naked opportunism of those who governed in their name. The interests of the realm, the security of the people, could easily be sidelined for a regent's ambition to enrich their family, to consolidate their power, or to eliminate rivals. Imagine a young pharaoh, say Tutankhamun of Egypt. He ascended the throne around the age of 9. For a significant portion of his short reign, the true power lay with two key officials, Ai and Horemheb. These men navigated the complex religious and political landscape of Egypt, guiding the young king through a period of significant religious restoration after the Eight-Nist heresy of Akhenaten. Their decisions, their counsel, effectively shaped the return to traditional polytheism and the rebuilding of the Ammonius priesthood. Was this Tutankhamun's own mature judgment at such a tender age? Unlikely. It was the judgment of his regents, exercised through him, for a mix of religious conviction, political expediency, and personal power. You see how the child became the vehicle for greater forces. Or perhaps you walked the cobblestone streets of medieval France, where Louis IX became king at the age of 12. His mother, Blanche of Castile, a woman of formidable intellect and iron will, served as regent. She faced down rebellious barons, crushed revolts, and skillfully navigated complex foreign relations, all while raising her son to be a pious and just ruler. Her unripe judgment was anything but, yet it was exercised on behalf of a child who, by law, was the true sovereign. You witnessed the immense power a regent could wield, sometimes for the profound benefit of the kingdom, sometimes for personal aggrandizement. Blanche's reign, while effective, was a constant struggle to maintain her authority against nobles who resented being ruled by a woman and a foreigner, particularly one who acted on behalf of a boy. The struggle was not always external. Sometimes the threat came from within the regent's own family, or from other powerful members of the court who sought to undermine the regency. The child king or queen became the ultimate prize in a deadly game of chess. Controlling access to the young monarch, influencing their education, even arranging their marriage, were all strategies to solidify power. The child's emotional development, their understanding of the world, was often shaped by these Machiavellian pressures, molding them into rulers either resilient or utterly broken. You observe the delicate dance around the royal cradle. Who would be the child's nurse? Who would be their tutor? Every appointment was a strategic move. The governess who whispered ideas into the young queen's ear might possess more actual influence than a general on the battlefield. The royal physician, trusted with the child's health, could become a kingmaker or a kingbreaker. These were the subtle levers of power in an age where direct control was paramount. The consequences of this unripe judgment could ripple across generations. A disastrous war initiated by an ambitious regent could bankrupt a nation or lose vast territories. A poorly chosen marriage for the young sovereign could lead to a contested succession, civil war, or the absorption of a kingdom into a larger empire. The decisions made in the shadow of the throne, often under the pretext of guiding a child, were anything but small. They were grand, sweeping gestures that irrevocably altered the course of history. Consider the Byzantine Empire, a realm perpetually teetering on the edge of chaos and succession crises. Empress Theophano, a figure of striking beauty and ruthless ambition, served as regent for her young sons, Basil II and Constantine VIII. Their father, Emperor Romanos II, died when Basil was only 5. Theophano quickly took a new husband, Nikephoros II Phocas, a brilliant general who became co-emperor. When Nikephoros proved difficult, she conspired in his assassination, then briefly installed another general, John Tzimiskes, as co-emperor. Her sons were pawns in this deadly game. You feel the chilling reality of a mother sacrificing alliances, even husbands, to protect and ultimately secure the future of her son's reign, a path paved with intrigue and bloodshed. These were the judgments that defined an empire's survival. And what of the children themselves as they grew into adolescence? The period of minority was not a static state. As the child aged, their own personality, their own will began to emerge. This transition from passive ward to active sovereign was often fraught with peril. A regent, accustomed to absolute power, might resist relinquishing control. A young monarch, impatient to rule, might rashly challenge established authority, sometimes with fatal consequences. You remember the story of Edward V of England, a boy of 12, who became king in 1483. His uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was appointed Lord Protector. The circumstances surrounding Edward's brief reign and subsequent disappearance, along with his younger brother, are one of history's most enduring mysteries. Richard assumed the throne as Richard III. Was this an act of protection, of stabilizing a realm threatened by factions, or a ruthless grab for power facilitated by the youth of the legitimate heir? The unripe judgment here belongs to the ambitious uncle, whose actions were guided by a desire for the crown, rather than the innocent boy's best interest. You sensed the suffocating atmosphere of suspicion and fear that must have surrounded the young king, trapped in the Tower of London. The lives of these child rulers were often short, violent, or marked by profound loneliness. Some, like Tutankhamun, died young, their reigns effectively overseen by others from start to finish. Others, like Louis XIV of France, who ascended the throne at 4, endured a long and tumultuous regency under his mother and of Austria and Cardinal Mazarin, only to emerge as one of history's most absolute monarchs. The experiences of their childhood, the lessons learned or mislearned during their regency, profoundly shaped the rulers they would become. You see the vast potential for both disaster and triumph encapsulated within the span of a single young life. The concept of unripe judgment extends beyond just the regents. It also describes the limited understanding a child or adolescent monarch would possess regarding the complexities of governing an empire. How could a young mind grasp the nuances of international diplomacy, the intricacies of fiscal policy, or the strategic necessities of military campaigns? They relied heavily on advisors who themselves had agendas. The court became a constant murmur of competing voices, each vying for the royal ear, each offering counsel that might serve their own interests above all else. Imagine being a young queen, Mary Queen of Scots, crowned at 9 months old. She spent her childhood in France, betrothed to the French Dauphin. While she was growing up, Scotland was governed by a series of regents, including her mother, Mary of Guise. These regents navigated Protestant Reformation, English interference, and internal power struggles. When Mary finally returned to Scotland as an 18-year-old widow, she faced a country vastly different from the one she had left. Her own judgments, informed by a French Catholic upbringing, clashed violently with the realities of a newly Protestant Scotland. Her reign, and indeed her life, became a tragic testament to the dangers of a crown worn too young, leading to a profound disconnect between ruler and realm. You feel the poignant isolation of a queen who, though adult, was unprepared for the maelstrom that awaited her. These dynasties in miniature, guided by unripe judgment, underscore a profound human truth. Power does not wait for maturity. It seizes the opportunity presented by youth, shaping both the child and the kingdom in its grasp. The legacy of these reigns is often a complex tapestry of stability achieved through ruthless regents, disastrous decisions made by ambitious courtiers, and the occasional miraculous emergence of a truly great ruler who, against all odds, transcended their difficult beginnings. You begin to understand that history is not just made by great men and women, It is often forged in the crucible of vulnerability, in the uncertain hands of children, and in the calculating minds of those who pulled their strings. The whispers in the great halls of power, the silent machinations behind closed doors, the desperate attempts to protect or exploit a youthful sovereign. These were the constants across centuries and cultures. The story of child rulers is not just a footnote in history, it is a fundamental pillar in understanding the nature of power itself, and how it bends even the most innocent to its will. You are left with the indelible image of a small hand, grasping a scepter too heavy, a crown too large, and a destiny shaped by forces beyond its control. This brings us to a crucial question. What happened when these child rulers finally came of age? Did they reclaim their power, or were they forever bound by the choices made on their behalf? The transition from minority to majority was rarely smooth, often violent, and always defining. It was a moment of reckoning, both for the young monarch and for those who had governed in their stead. But what of the kingdom itself? What legacy was forged not in the dramatic clashes of coming of age, but in the long, quiet years of a child's reign? You have seen the child king, a small figure on a grand throne, the strings of power pulled by unseen hands. Now turn your gaze to the realm, the land and its people as they slowly, imperceptibly drift. Imagine yourself in the heart of the kingdom's capital, not during a time of great upheaval, but during a period of prolonged minority rule. The bustling market square still thrums with life, the bells of the great cathedral still chime, and the royal palace still stands proudly, its banners unfurled. Yet you sense a subtle shift, a quiet unease that settles over the city like a fine dust. The decrees that issue forth, bearing the child sovereign's name, often seem contradictory, reflecting not a unified vision, but the competing interests of various regents and powerful factions. You might notice, for example, that the grand road you once traveled, connecting the capital to the prosperous northern provinces, has begun to show signs of neglect. Potholes deepen, bridges creak under the weight of traffic, and bandits become a more common threat. These are not the dramatic ravages of war, but the slow decay of infrastructure that goes unmaintained, uninvested in. The royal treasury, once robust, is now a battleground for competing demands, its resources diverted not into grand projects that benefit the whole, but into the pockets of ambitious nobles, or to finance proxy wars between the regents themselves. The very fabric of governance begins to fray. Justice, once administered with a singular royal authority, now becomes a patchwork of local interpretations and biases. Powerful regional lords, sensing the weakness at the center, begin to assert greater autonomy. They raise their own taxes, levy their own troops, and dispense their own justice, often in defiance of edicts from the distant, fragmented court. You, as a subject, might find that your appeals to the king are met with shrugs, or that your local lord's word carries more weight than any royal proclamation. The sense of a unified kingdom, bound by a common law and a singular sovereign, slowly dissipates. It is like watching a magnificent tapestry unravel thread by thread, not torn apart, but gently coming undone. The kingdom, during these long years of a child king's minority, often experiences a kind of policy paralysis. Long-term planning, essential for growth and stability, becomes almost impossible. Each regent, each influential council member has their own agenda, their own limited time in the sun before another rival rises. This means that a crucial irrigation project begun by one regent might be abandoned by the next, who prioritizes a new defensive fortification. A promising trade agreement negotiated by one faction could be scuttled by another, keen to favor their own mercantile interests. You see the half-finished canals, the abandoned mines, the unfulfilled promises that dot the landscape, monuments to a lack of consistent vision. This drifting is not always a violent fall. Sometimes, it is a slow erosion of prestige and influence on the international stage. Neighboring kingdoms, observing the instability at the heart of the child-ruled realm, might grow bolder. They might press territorial claims or subtly undermine diplomatic relations, knowing that the king is but a symbol, and his advisors are too engrossed in internal squabbles to present a united front. Treaties might be less honored, alliances less firm. You hear the whispers from foreign envoys, their polite words barely concealing their thinly veiled contempt for a kingdom that cannot properly govern itself. The kingdom's voice, once strong and clear, becomes muffled, hesitant. Consider the atmosphere within the royal court itself. While the young king learns his letters and practices his horsemanship, the true power struggles unfold around him. The royal nursery, once a place of hopeful future, becomes another arena for political maneuvering. Who advises the boy? Who teaches him? Who are his companions? Each decision is fraught with implications for future influence. You might observe a parade of tutors, each discarded as their patron falls from favor. The very education of the king becomes a political football, rather than a dedicated effort to prepare him for the daunting task of rule. Even for the most well-intentioned regents, the challenge of maintaining a kingdom's vitality during a minority is immense. They are, by definition, temporary custodians. Their loyalty might be divided between the crown, their own family, and their personal ambitions. This inherent instability means that few regents are willing or able to make the bold, long-term decisions necessary for a kingdom to thrive. Why invest in a project that might not bear fruit until after your power has waned? Why risk alienating powerful factions when your own position is precarious? You understand the logic, but you also see the consequences for the realm. The absence of a mature, decisive monarch at the helm can foster a culture of inaction and bureaucratic inertia. Decisions are postponed, difficult choices are avoided, and reforms are shelved. Everyone waits for the child king to come of age, hoping he will be the strong hand needed to steer the ship back on course. But by then years, perhaps decades, have passed. Opportunities for innovation are missed. Problems that could have been resolved early fester and grow into intractable crises. You feel the stagnation, the heavy weight of unaddressed issues pressing down on the kingdom. Think of the psychological impact on the populace. A distant, unseen child ruler cannot inspire the same personal loyalty or affection as an adult monarch who leads armies, makes pronouncements, and embodies the kingdom's strength. The people's connection to the crown weakens. The concept of their king becomes abstract, almost mythical. This erosion of popular support, while not immediately visible in rebellion, is a slow, steady drain on the kingdom's internal strength. You hear fewer heartfelt cries of "Long live the king," and more cynical remarks about who truly holds the reins of power. The regency periods could stretch for many years, sometimes for a decade or even two. Imagine an entire generation growing up under this diffused, unstable leadership. They know no other form of rule. They learn to navigate a world where loyalty is fluid, where power is fragmented, and where the central authority is a distant, often ineffective entity. This can lead to a fundamental shift in the kingdom's political culture, making it harder for even a capable adult monarch to reassert full control. The habits of independence, of local autonomy once established, are difficult to break. Sometimes, the gentle decline manifests in a gradual loss of territory. Border regions, poorly defended and loosely governed, might be absorbed by more assertive neighbors. Or perhaps wealthy provinces, feeling neglected and exploited, might slowly drift towards independence, forging their own alliances and eventually breaking away entirely. You do not see a grand war of conquest, but a slow, almost imperceptible shrinking of the kingdom's borders, like a puddle evaporating in the sun. Each lost town, each ceded treaty, is a small tremor, not an earthquake, but the cumulative effect is profound. This subtle decay can be more insidious than outright civil war. A civil war is loud, dramatic, and its wounds, though deep, are often clear. A gentle decline, however, creeps in almost unnoticed. It is the steady drip that wears away stone, the quiet rust that weakens iron. It creates a kingdom that, when its child king finally comes of age, might be a shadow of its former self. A kingdom where the institutions are weakened, the treasury is depleted, the loyalty of its subjects is fragmented, and its standing in the world diminished. You are left with the lingering sense of what could have been. The potential unrealized, the opportunities lost, the destiny diverted. A great ship, once sailing purposefully, now merely drifts on the currents, its rudder unattended, its sails slack, waiting for a hand that is too young to grasp the tiller, while others argue over which direction the wind blows. The history of child kings is not just about the individuals on the throne, but about the profound, often quiet, suffering of the realms they were too young to truly rule. Their growth was the kingdom's gentle decline. The gentle decline of a kingdom under the rule of a child often leaves no dramatic monument to its passing. It is not the sudden collapse of an empire, etched in fiery chronicles of invasion or rebellion. Instead, you find its traces in the subtle shifts, the quiet alterations that ripple through generations. You look for them not in grand declarations, but in the silences between the lines of ancient texts. You seek them in the unexplained vulnerabilities that later rulers grappled with, the burdens they inherited without fully comprehending their origin. Imagine yourself now, standing not on the battlements of a besieged castle, but within the hushed sanctity of a vast, forgotten archive. The air here is thick with the scent of aged parchment and dust, a testament to centuries of stored thought. Light filters dimly through high, leaded windows, illuminating motes dancing in the stillness. You run your hand over the spine of a leather-bound ledger, its pages brittle with time. This is where you begin to trace the echoes. You are searching for the subtle signs of a kingdom that began to falter, not from external threat, but from an internal, almost imperceptible erosion. You are looking for the economic downturns that weren't attributed to war or famine, but to years of absentee decision-making, of resources mismanaged by grasping regents, of trade routes neglected because no one with true authority championed their cause. You might find a series of accounts detailing decreasing tax revenues, not a sudden plummet, but a slow, steady leakage, like a vessel draining drop by imperceptible drop. You read entries noting the lack of investment in infrastructure, the crumbling roads and neglected bridges that gradually choked off internal commerce. These are the quiet crimes of child kingship, not malicious intent, but the unavoidable consequence of a power vacuum at the very top. You see how the treasury, instead of accumulating for future ventures, was slowly depleted to satisfy the demands of ambitious courtiers, or to maintain the expensive illusion of a strong central power. This is the inheritance left to the adult king, a kingdom where the coffers are bare, and the potential for new initiatives is stifled before it can even be conceived. You realize that a kingdom needs not just a leader, but a vision, and that vision is a rare commodity when the throne is occupied by a minor. You shift your gaze from the ledgers to maps, sprawling documents unfurled across heavy oak tables. These are not maps of grand conquests, but maps that reveal quiet retreats. You trace the borders, noticing the subtle encroachment of neighboring powers, the loss of a key border town not through a major conflict, but through a slow, deliberate erosion of influence, a lack of firm assertion. Perhaps a series of treaties were signed, seemingly innocuous at the time, that subtly conceded rights or territories that would prove invaluable a generation later. You see how the careful diplomacy that safeguards a kingdom's interests falters when its ultimate authority is a mere child, easily swayed or simply too young to grasp the long-term implications of such agreements. The concept of a lost legacy here is not merely about a kingdom that fell, but one that failed to reach its potential. You ponder the innovations that were never pursued, the cultural flourishing that never fully bloomed, the scientific advancements that languished because there was no sovereign strong enough or visionary enough to patronize them. Think of the great libraries that might have been built, the universities that might have been founded, the artistic movements that might have been fostered, all silently aborted because the focus of the realm was consumed by internal power struggles, by the simple act of maintaining the status quo, rather than pushing the boundaries of progress. You imagine the generations of artisans and scholars who, lacking royal patronage, turned their talents elsewhere, or whose genius withered unacknowledged. The vibrant tapestry of culture and intellect, instead of expanding, remained static, or even began to unravel at the edges. You feel the weight of these unspoken possibilities, the quiet grief for what might have been, for the roads not taken in the grand journey of civilization. Your search then takes you to personal correspondence, diaries, and court records, often fragmented and biased, yet still offering glimpses into the human cost. You read between the lines, sensing the frustration of seasoned administrators, the quiet despair of loyal subjects who saw their efforts undermined by the whims of a child or the machinations of a regent. You uncover instances where justice was delayed or even perverted, because the final arbiter of law was too young to understand the gravity of his decisions, or because his nominal authority was easily overridden by those with greater ambition. You picture the court itself during these times, a viper's nest of intrigue where loyalty was a scarce commodity and ambition was rife. You can almost hear the hushed whispers in the corridors, the rustle of expensive silks as courtiers jockey for position, knowing that the true power lies not with the small figure on the throne, but with the faction that can best manipulate him. You sense the atmosphere of constant uncertainty, where alliances shift like desert sands, and the future of the kingdom feels perpetually adrift. Consider the child king himself. You often find scant personal detail about their early lives, overshadowed by the immense political forces around them. Their childhoods, if they can even be called that, were a series of formal lessons and public appearances, stripped of the carefree joy that defines youth. You imagine the immense isolation, the burden of expectations, the constant tutelage and manipulation. You feel a pang of empathy for these children, thrust into a role they could never truly comprehend, their names destined to be mere placeholders in the annals of history. What becomes of their adult reigns, if they even survive long enough to claim full power? Often you find that the experience of being a child king leaves an indelible mark. They might emerge as timid and indecisive, their self-confidence shattered by years of being a puppet. Or conversely, they might become ruthless and paranoid, having learned the bitter lessons of betrayal and manipulation at an early age. The kingdom that receives them as adults is often scarred, and they themselves are often deeply wounded, ill-equipped to heal either themselves or their realm. You see the ripples of their childhood reign in the decisions they make as adults. Perhaps they cling to loyalties forged during their regency, even if those loyalties prove detrimental to the kingdom. Perhaps they are forever wary of counsel, unable to trust the intentions of those around them. The legacy of their childhood is not just the state of the kingdom, but the character of the ruler they become, a character often shaped by trauma and premature responsibility. Think now of the long-term implications, extending far beyond the immediate generation. You notice how a kingdom weakened by a child's reign often becomes more susceptible to future external threats. Its internal divisions, fostered during a period of weak central authority, can fester and eventually lead to civil unrest or even fragmentation. The erosion of trust between the ruler and the ruled, the sense that the crown is not truly invested in the welfare of its people, can take centuries to repair if it ever does. You can observe these echoes in the fragmented genealogies of noble families, some rising to prominence during a period of a child king, cementing their power base while the central authority was distracted. Others, perhaps more loyal to the crown, find their influence diminished, their voices unheard. These shifts in power dynamics among the aristocracy can have profound effects on the balance of the kingdom for generations, altering the very fabric of its governance and society. The true legacy of these child kings, then, is often an absence. It is the story of what did not happen, what was not built, what was not achieved. It is a testament to the crucial importance of consistent, mature leadership, even when it is imperfect. You realize that a kingdom is not a static entity. It is a living, breathing organism that requires constant nourishment, protection, and direction. When that direction is absent or misdirected by hands too small to grasp the reins, the organism withers. You close the ancient ledger, its pages whispering their silent tales. You fold the faded map, its borders a testament to quiet retreat. You feel the weight of these lost possibilities, the unseen currents of history that shape futures in ways no one at the time could fully perceive. The echoes of childhood, when they resonate from a royal throne, are not loud, triumphant fanfares. They are the subtle, melancholic strains of a kingdom's potential, gently fading into the mists of time. This journey through the forgotten kingdoms ruled by child kings brings you to a profound realization. It is not just the dramatic falls that mark the tapestry of history, but also the gentle declines, the slow erosions of strength and purpose. You come to understand that the absence of a strong hand on the tiller, the lack of a mature mind guiding the ship of state, can be just as devastating as the fiercest storm. You look at the present with new eyes, understanding how the past, even its quietest moments, casts long shadows. You recognize the delicate balance required for societies to flourish, the constant vigilance against stagnation, the absolute necessity of thoughtful, responsible stewardship. The stories of these child kings, though often relegated to the forgotten corners of history, serve as a potent, if melancholic, reminder of the profound impact that even the most innocent of reigns can have on the destiny of nations. The quest to trace these lost legacies is not about condemnation. It is about understanding the subtle mechanics of power, the immense pressures on individuals and institutions, and the enduring consequences of moments when a kingdom's fate rested on shoulders too young to bear the weight. You leave the archive, the smell of ancient paper clinging to your clothes, carrying with you not just facts, but a deeper appreciation for the silent forces that shape the course of human endeavor. The whispers of these forgotten children, ruling their miniature empires, remind you that history is full of nuance. It is not always about the grand battles or the celebrated triumphs. Often, it is in the quiet spaces, the missed opportunities, and the slow, almost imperceptible shifts, that the most profound lessons are learned. You carry these echoes with you, a quiet understanding of the subtle ways in which the past continues to shape the world you inhabit. You have come to understand that history is a tapestry woven with subtle threads, not just the bold strokes of celebrated heroes or dramatic battles. Sometimes, the most profound patterns emerge from the quiet spaces, the almost imperceptible shifts in power that determine the fate of millions. One such quiet, yet immensely impactful phenomenon is the succession of a kingdom to a child. Imagine the weight of an entire realm, its future, its security, its very identity, suddenly resting upon shoulders that have barely begun to broaden. You stand at the precipice of a throne room, perhaps in ancient Egypt or medieval England, or the expansive courts of imperial China. The air hums not with the roar of a conquering army, but with a different kind of tension, the hush after a monarch's death, followed by the presentation of their heir. And that heir in this particular moment is a child. A small figure, perhaps clutching a toy or looking bewildered, or displaying an unnerving solemnity for their few years. This is not a rare occurrence in the annals of history. It is a recurring motif, a silent, almost inevitable chapter in the story of power. Across civilizations and centuries, from the Nile to the Thames, from the Yellow River to the Golden Horn, countless empires have found their destinies placed into the hands of a boy or girl, still years away from adulthood. What does it mean for a kingdom when its ruler can barely read the decrees they are expected to sign, or grasp the intricacies of diplomacy, or command an army. It means the immediate emergence of a power vacuum, a void that nature and ambitious courtiers abhor. It means the swift elevation of regents, caretakers of the realm and the child, whose loyalties are often divided between the crown's stability and their own personal ascendancy. You can almost feel the shift in the court's dynamics. The whispers grow louder. The subtle glances between nobles become more charged. Every gesture, every word around the child monarch, is infused with layers of hidden meaning and thinly veiled ambition. Consider the child, suddenly elevated to the pinnacle of power, yet utterly powerless. Their meals are chosen for them. Their tutors dictate their days. Their playmates are selected for their political connections. They live in a gilded cage, a potent symbol for their people, but a prisoner of circumstance. They are taught the rituals of kingship, the proper bearing, the ceremonial duties, but the true levers of power remain firmly out of reach, manipulated by those who claim to act in their name. You watch as a young prince, no older than 8, sits on a throne too large, his feet dangling far above the floor, listening to reports of distant wars and complex legal disputes. His expression is carefully neutral, a mask taught by vigilant tutors, but you can perceive the flicker of incomprehension in his eyes. He is a puppet, albeit one whose very existence legitimizes the rule of his puppeteers. The regency itself is a fascinating, often perilous period. Who steps into this void? Often it is the child's mother, an empress dowager or queen regent, wielding immense influence, but also facing immense scrutiny and suspicion. It might be a powerful uncle, a trusted minister, or a council of nobles. Regardless of who it is, their rule is always provisional, always contingent on the young monarch eventually coming of age. This creates an inherent instability. The regent must govern effectively, protect the kingdom, and educate the future ruler, all while navigating treacherous court politics and fending off rivals who might seek to undermine their authority or worse, replace the child altogether. Think of the boy king Tutankhamun of Egypt, ascending to the throne around the age of 9 in the tumultuous aftermath of his father Akhenaten's religious revolution. You picture the bustling court in ancient Thebes, the priests and nobles vying for influence. Tutankhamun was a symbol, a crucial figurehead to restore order and traditional worship. But the true power lay with his advisors, Horemheb the general and I the vizier, who effectively steered the ship of state, undoing the unpopular reforms and rebuilding the kingdom's religious and political foundations. You imagine the young pharaoh, adorned in gold and symbols of divine power, participating in rituals, but his every move, every decision, carefully guided by the older, more experienced hands that truly held the reins of power. His reign, though brief, marked a significant course correction for Egypt, a silent testament to the influence of his regents. Or travel forward in time, to the cold, damp castles of 16th-century England. You are present when Edward VI, the only son of Henry VIII, inherits the crown at the tender age of 9. Here is a boy of remarkable intelligence and piety, deeply committed to the Protestant reforms his father had begun. But his youth meant that England's destiny was placed into the hands of a powerful council of regency, dominated first by his uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, and later by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. You feel the chill winds of religious change sweeping through the land, shaping the very fabric of society. Edward, though determined, was too young to fully control the religious zeal and political maneuvering of his regents. His advisors pushed England further into Protestantism, often with ruthless efficiency, dismantling Catholic traditions and seizing church wealth, all in the name of the young king. You can almost hear the fervent sermons, the smashing of idols, the hurried reforms, all driven by men who knew their time was limited, and who sought to solidify their religious and political agenda before the king came of age and potentially chose a different path. The challenge for these regents was always immense. How to govern in the name of another, how to make weighty decisions that would shape generations, all while knowing that one day, their ward would assume full power and might judge their actions. This created a delicate balance, a dance between authority and deference. A regent too strong risked being seen as usurping the throne. A regent too weak risked anarchy. The kingdom's stability often hung by a thread, contingent on the regent's skill, the loyalty of the nobility, and the health of the young monarch. You observe the young Louis XIV of France, the future Sun King, who ascended to the throne before his 5th birthday. His minority was dominated by his mother, Anne of Austria, and her chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin. This period was not one of quiet stability, it was marked by the Fronde, a series of civil wars that pitted nobles and parliaments against the crown, ostensibly against Mazarin's authority, but with the boy king as the ultimate prize. You feel the tension, the fear, as the royal family itself was forced to flee Paris at times, humiliating for a monarchy. Louis would later recall the trauma of these years, forming his deep-seated mistrust of the nobility and his unwavering belief in absolute monarchy. The lessons learned during his childhood, under the guidance of his powerful regent Mazarin, who held the realm together through sheer cunning and political will, profoundly shaped the longest reign in European history. You see how the vulnerabilities of a child king can, paradoxically, forge an unshakable will in the man he becomes, determined never to experience such powerlessness again. These periods of child rule often served as crucibles, shaping not only the young monarchs themselves, but also the very structure of governance. The power delegated to regents could establish precedents for ministerial authority. The necessity of maintaining stability often led to the strengthening of centralized administration, as regents sought to rein in potentially unruly nobles. You can trace the lines of these early struggles, seeing how the foundations for future absolutism, or indeed future constitutionalism, were often laid during these delicate transitions. The education of a child king was paramount, a carefully curated program designed to mold a future ruler. They were taught history, strategy, languages, theology, and the intricate etiquette of court. But perhaps the most important lesson was a silent one: the observation of power in action, the subtle art of negotiation, the ruthless necessity of decision, and the constant threat of ambition. They saw firsthand how the kingdom functioned, for better or worse, through the eyes of their regents. They learned not just from books, but from the living theater of their own court. You watch as a tutor patiently explains a map of the kingdom to a 9-year-old sovereign, pointing out strategic strongholds and trade routes, knowing that one day, this child will be responsible for their defense and prosperity. But what of the personal cost to these young rulers? Imagine the isolation, the burden of expectation, the lack of a normal childhood. They were kings or queens first, children second. Their play was often strategic, their friendships political, their very identities forged in the furnace of public duty. Some emerged as strong, capable rulers like Louis XIV. Others struggled, overshadowed by their regents, or succumbing to illness or early death, like Edward VI. Their childhoods were stolen, replaced by the crushing weight of a crown. You feel a pang of empathy for these miniature monarchs, caught in a destiny not of their choosing, forced to grow up at an accelerated, unnatural pace. The silent succession, the handing down of power to tender years, is more than a historical footnote. It is a recurring testament to the fragile yet enduring nature of institutions. It highlights the human element in governance, the ambition of regents, the loyalty of subjects, the vulnerability of even the most powerful offices. It is a reminder that the continuity of state often relies not on a single strong hand, but on the delicate balance of many, working in the shadow of a child. You walk away from these throne rooms, whether imaginary or historically reconstructed, with a profound appreciation for the subtle currents of power that flow beneath the surface of grand historical narratives. The stories of these child kings, often overshadowed by their adult counterparts, are crucial chapters in the unending saga of leadership, sacrifice, and the enduring quest for control. They show you that true power can be both wielded and simply represented, and that sometimes the most influential reigns begin with a child on a throne, learning to play a very serious game. You have journeyed through the intricate courts where child kings wore crowns too heavy for their young heads, learning the delicate dance of power. Now let your gaze shift from the gilded throne to the shadows that stretch out from its base. Here, in the dim corners of history's grand stage, you find the true architects of kingdoms, the silent puppeteers pulling the strings of destiny. These are the advisors, the regents, the powerful ministers who, while never wearing the crown themselves, held the scepter of actual authority firmly in their grasp. Imagine yourself in a vast, echoing hall. Sunlight, filtered through stained glass, casts long, dancing patterns on the polished stone floor. At the far end, a small figure, perhaps no older than 8 or 9, sits upon a throne designed for a grown man or woman. This child, the legitimate ruler, may be surrounded by the trappings of power, but the decrees, the declarations, the very pulse of the kingdom, originate elsewhere. They come from the lean, sharp-eyed man standing just beside the throne, or the quiet woman consulting closely with the royal guard, or the council of elders whose whispered conversations carry more weight than any royal pronouncement. This is the unseen hand at work. The necessity of these shadow rulers was both practical and legal. A child, by any measure, lacked the experience, the wisdom, and often the legal capacity to govern. A 5-year-old cannot command an army, negotiate a treaty, or reform a tax system. The vacuum of power left by a child's ascension to the throne was immense, and nature, history teaches you, abhors a vacuum. It was into this void that the advisors stepped, ostensibly as guardians of the realm, protectors of the child king, and stewards of the dynasty. But human ambition is a formidable force, and the line between stewardship and absolute control was often blurred, then erased entirely. These advisors, whether they were regents by blood, an uncle, a mother, a grandparent, or powerful ministers chosen for their administrative prowess, quickly realized the immense power they now wielded. They controlled access to the child king, filtering information, shaping perceptions, and often, determining the child's very education. You might see them sitting in on every lesson, scrutinizing every book, ensuring that the young monarch's worldview aligned perfectly with their own interests. Consider the meticulous craft of their control. First, there was proximity. The most powerful advisors were rarely far from the throne. They lived in the palace, attended every state function, and were often the last face the child saw before sleep and the first upon waking. This constant presence allowed them to subtly, or not so subtly, guide the child's understanding of their duties, their enemies, and their allies. You would observe the child turning instinctively to them for guidance, for reassurance, for an explanation of the complex world they were meant to rule. Then came the control of information. Imagine an intricate web woven around the child king. Dispatches from distant provinces, reports from military commanders, petitions from the common folk, all passed through the advisor's hands first. They decided what the child needed to know, what could be summarized, and what could be withheld entirely. In a world before mass communication, controlling the flow of news was tantamount to controlling reality itself. The child king, isolated in the palace, grew up with a version of the kingdom carefully curated by those who surrounded them. The shaping of the child's education was another critical lever of power. While tutors might be hired to teach languages, history, and military strategy, the ultimate curriculum was often dictated by the advisor. They chose the teachers, approved the texts, and guided the discussions. The aim was not necessarily to create a brilliant, independent monarch, but often a compliant one. A ruler who understood their theoretical power but was accustomed to deferring to the wisdom of their elders, specifically their powerful advisor. You would witness the slow, steady indoctrination, a gentle molding of a young mind to fit a pre-existing political agenda. The advisor's power extended far beyond the palace walls. They controlled the treasury, directing the flow of wealth, approving expenditures, and collecting taxes. They commanded the armies, appointing generals, deploying troops, and declaring war or peace. The vast machinery of state, from the lowliest tax collector to the most esteemed diplomat, answered to them. Their word became law, their decisions shaped policy, and their ambitions, whether for the good of the realm or their own personal gain, became the kingdom's trajectory. Think of the grand viziers of ancient Eastern empires, the prime ministers of European kingdoms, or the powerful eunuchs and scholar officials in imperial China. Often, these figures rose from humble origins or from minor aristocratic families, ascending to unimaginable power during periods of royal minority. Their intellect, their political acumen, and their sheer ruthlessness often allowed them to dominate the court. You might find them orchestrating strategic marriages for the child king, forging alliances that strengthened their own position, or subtly eliminating rivals who dared to challenge their authority. Plots and counterplots were their daily bread, and the whispers of conspiracy were the background music to their reign. Take for example, the period of the English Regency councils during the minority of kings like Henry III or Edward VI. While different factions vied for influence, powerful figures like William Marshal during Henry's youth, or the Duke of Somerset and later the Duke of Northumberland during Edward's reign, effectively governed the realm. You would see them navigating treacherous political waters, fending off challenges from disgruntled nobles, and guiding the young kingdom through periods of religious upheaval or foreign wars. Their names, perhaps less remembered by the casual historian than the kings they served, were synonymous with the actual power of the state. Or consider the example of Cardinal Richelieu in France, though Louis XIII was technically of age when Richelieu began his ascent. Richelieu's power, built upon a foundation of royal trust and political genius, became so pervasive that he effectively ruled the kingdom, shaping its foreign policy, domestic reforms, and even its culture, often overriding the king's initial inclinations. You would observe Richelieu, a man of the church, commanding armies, dictating terms to ambassadors, and building the foundations of French absolutism, all while technically serving a monarch. The relationship between the advisor and the child king was a complex and often perilous dance. For the advisor, the goal was to maintain power for as long as possible, ideally until the child reached an age where they could be easily manipulated, or until the advisor had consolidated enough power to make their position unassailable. For the child, the journey was one of growing awareness, of slowly realizing that the authority they nominally held was being exercised by another. You can almost feel the tension building as the child king approached maturity. The charming, compliant child who once deferred to every suggestion begins to ask questions, to voice their own opinions, to assert a nascent will. This was the advisor's greatest challenge. How to transition from absolute control to a partnership, or even to relinquish power gracefully, without inviting retribution from a newly empowered monarch. Some advisors managed this transition with skill, becoming trusted elder statesmen. Others clung to power too long, sparking rebellions or leading to their own downfall, sometimes violently. The child king, on their part, faced the monumental task of reclaiming their own kingdom. This often involved forming their own alliances, cultivating loyal supporters among the nobility and military, and subtly or overtly challenging the advisor's authority. You might witness secret meetings, whispered conversations, and the slow, deliberate construction of a rival power base within the court. The outcome of this struggle often determined the future stability of the kingdom and the legacy of both the monarch and their former guardian. The legacy of these unseen hands is profound. Their decisions, their policies, their personal ambitions, shaped entire generations and altered the course of history. They funded expeditions, waged wars, reformed laws, and patronized arts, all in the name of a child king. Yet, their direct influence is often relegated to historical footnotes, overshadowed by the formal reigns of the monarchs they served. These shadow rulers remind you that power is not always found on the throne. It resides in the ability to influence, to control resources, to command loyalty, and to shape perception. In the forgotten kingdoms ruled by child kings, it was often the quiet voice, the steady hand, the cunning mind operating from the shadows, that truly governed. Their stories are a testament to the enduring human drive for control, and a fascinating chapter in the intricate tapestry of power dynamics throughout history. You see how the most significant transformations were not always decreed by a monarch, but meticulously engineered by the advisors who truly ruled, often with an unseen hand. It is a subtle lesson in history, one that asks you to look beyond the glittering surface of kingship, and into the deep, often murky waters of true authority. You look into those deep, often murky waters of true authority, and what you often find are not always the grand declarations of powerful monarchs. Instead, you hear the quiet whispers of forgotten children, their brief reigns of faded tapestry, woven into the vast historical record, but often obscured by the bolder threads of adult ambition and political intrigue. These are the stories we seek to unearth now, pulling back the veil of time, sifting through the dust of centuries to find the human heart beating beneath the child king's gilded crown. It is a painstaking process, like restoring an ancient fresco, where every brushstroke reveals a new detail, every layer of grime removed brings a lost face into clearer focus. You realize that unearthing these particular stories presents a unique challenge to the historian. Many child kings were placeholders, figures whose true thoughts and actions were either dismissed as childish whim, carefully controlled, or simply not recorded. Imagine attempting to discern the genuine agency of a boy of 10, when every word he uttered was filtered through the interpretations of his tutors, his regents, his court. Consider the very nature of the historical record itself. For many of these young rulers, the chroniclers of the age were not interested in the child. They were concerned with the regent, the powerful noble, the queen mother who held the reins of power. The boy king was merely the vessel, the legal justification for their own authority. Their personal thoughts, their struggles, their moments of joy or fear, were rarely deemed worthy of inscription. You are left with fragments, tantalizing glimpses in the margins of official documents or the biased accounts of rival factions. Yet these fragments hold immense power. They invite you to look closer, to imagine the daily life of a child thrust into unimaginable responsibility. What was it like to wake each morning in a vast, echoing palace, knowing the weight of a kingdom rested, however symbolically, upon your slender shoulders? You are no longer just a boy or a girl. You are the embodiment of the state, a living symbol of succession and stability. Think for example of Tutankhamun, the golden boy of ancient Egypt. For millennia, his reign was a mere flicker, a minor king on a list of pharaohs, lost beneath the shifting sands of time. His story, the very idea of his existence as a ruling child, was literally buried, hidden from human memory for over 3,000 years. It took years of relentless excavation, pickaxes and brushes, sweat and dedication to unearth his tomb. And in doing so, we did not just find golden artifacts. We resurrected a child king. We pieced together a narrative of a boy who ascended the throne at 9 years old, died mysteriously at 19, and for a brief moment, tried to steer a nation recovering from religious upheaval. His story is a testament not just to his life, but to the extraordinary effort required to pull such a faded tapestry from oblivion. You see how even the most famous child king needed to be physically unearthed. Then you shift your gaze to the more tragic and often murky narratives of Europe's child kings. Turn your imagination to the Tower of London, a place that still echoes with the unresolved mystery of Edward V of England. Crowned at 12 years old, he vanished before he could truly rule. His story is less about the decrees he issued or the battles he commanded, and more about the sinister machinations that consumed his brief, tragic moment on the throne. The historical record here is not merely sparse. It is deliberately obscured, twisted by the ambitions of his uncle, Richard III. To uncover Edward's story is to navigate a labyrinth of political intrigue, whispers of murder, and the chilling silence of a disappearance. You grapple with the challenge of finding the boy within the legend, the human being swallowed by a dynastic struggle. You might also consider the many Holy Roman emperors who ascended as mere children, for example, Henry IV, crowned king of the Romans at 6 years old. 4 years, Germany was governed by powerful archbishops and nobles, vying for control of the child. His education was a battleground, his moral upbringing a pawn in political games. How do you separate the decisions made by the boy king from the wills of his warring regents? The documents rarely tell you. You must infer, piece together context, and understand the pressures on all parties involved. It is an act of historical empathy, attempting to understand the environment that shaped a child who held an empire's future in his small hands. Across continents you find similar stories. In China, countless emperors ascended to the dragon throne as infants or young children. Pu Yi, the last emperor, came to power as a toddler, literally unable to speak his own name, let alone govern. His life was meticulously recorded, but always through the lens of those who controlled him. For earlier child emperors, the records are even more fragmented, often just dates of birth and ascension followed by dates of death, sometimes suspiciously early. You are left to wonder about the court eunuchs, the empress dowagers, the powerful mandarins who truly ruled behind the silken screens, while a child played with jade toys in the Forbidden City, utterly oblivious to the true machinations of power. These fading narratives represent a unique kind of historical challenge. They force you to question the very nature of historical truth. Is history only what is written down by the victors? Or does it also reside in the gaps, in the silences, in the stories deliberately overlooked or suppressed? When you seek to unearth the stories of boy kings, you are not just looking for facts. You are looking for echoes. You are listening for the unheard voices, the dreams that were perhaps never articulated, the fears that were always present. It requires a different kind of historical detective work. You must read between the lines of treaties and royal charters. You must scrutinize the guest lists of banquets for clues about power shifts. You must study architectural changes in palaces to understand who was building what, and for whom. Every artifact, every surviving letter, every mention in a minor chronicle becomes a vital thread in this faded tapestry. You become a weaver yourself, carefully stitching together what remains, attempting to recreate the vibrant image that time and neglect have diminished. The act of unearthing these stories is a powerful reminder that history is not a static collection of dates and names. It is a living, breathing entity, constantly being reinterpreted and rediscovered. When you engage with these forgotten kingdoms and their child rulers, you are not just learning about the past. You are participating in its revival. You are giving voice to those who were silenced, acknowledging the humanity behind the titles. These are not merely footnotes. They are full, albeit tragically brief, human lives. They faced challenges unique to their extreme youth and extraordinary circumstances. Their stories, even in their fragmented form, teach you about the vulnerability of power, the complexities of human ambition, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit, even when that spirit is still very, very young. You begin to understand that the boring history of these child kings is anything but. It is a profound exploration of childhood lost, innocence corrupted, and destiny imposed. It is a testament to the powerful, often unseen forces that truly shape empires, and a quiet call to remember those who were too young to write their own stories. You might imagine a golden cradle, soft silks, and the gentle cooing of nannies, a miniature crown placed ever so delicately upon a slumbering infant's head. You might picture the innocent joy of a young boy or girl playing in sun-dappled courtyards, occasionally pulled away for a lesson in statecraft or strategy, their greatest worry whether their favorite toy soldier has gone missing. But set aside that tender vision, for it is a mirage. It is a lullaby sung to soothe the conscience of history, not an accurate reflection of the lives these young rulers actually led. Step instead into the chilling reality. You are no longer merely observing, you are that child king. The moment the old monarch's breath leaves their body, a silent, deadly game begins. You are the prize, the ultimate symbol of legitimacy, but you are also the weakest link. You are a child, and around you the vultures gather. Your own voice, still high and uncertain, holds no true sway. You see the strained smiles, the polite bows, but you hear the whispers behind closed doors. You feel the tug of war as different factions, often led by your own relatives, vie for control of your person, your education, your future. Your mother might fight fiercely to protect you, but even her love is entangled in the complex web of dynastic ambition. Your uncles, your distant cousins, the powerful nobles, each sees you as a means to an end. You are a living shield, a royal rubber stamp for their decrees, their land grabs, their wars. Your tears, your protests, your simple desire for a normal childhood are irrelevant in the face of such relentless ambition. You learn early the taste of fear. The guard outside your chamber changes too often, a new face appearing without explanation. A new taster is assigned to your food, their face pale with apprehension as they sample each dish before it reaches your small plate. You hear stories, hushed at first, then more openly, of child princes disappearing from their beds, of young heirs succumbing to a sudden, mysterious illness that sweeps them away in a single night. You might wake in the dead of night, hearing muffled footsteps outside your door, and your heart pounds a frantic rhythm of pure dread against your ribs. The threat of poison, of an assassin's blade, of a carefully orchestrated accident is not a distant possibility. It is a constant, suffocating companion. You are taught to distrust, to observe, to never truly relax your guard, even in the presumed safety of your own nursery. The weight of the crown is not just symbolic. It is a heavy, crushing reality that presses down on your developing mind. You are isolated. Your playmates are often chosen for their loyalty, not their companionship, and even they are watched, their words reported to your regents. You are not allowed the luxury of childhood mistakes. Every tantrum, every childish whim, every innocent observation can be twisted, used against you, or seen as a sign of weakness by those who wish to replace you. You grow up quickly or you do not grow up at all. The constant scrutiny, the need to perform, to appear strong and regal when you are terrified and confused, carves deep lines into your young spirit, stripping away the innocence that should be your birthright. Your days are a relentless march through lessons. You learn languages, military strategy, law, theology, court etiquette. There is no time for idle play, no space for carefree exploration of the world beyond the palace walls. Your tutors are stern, their expectations immense, their instructions delivered with an urgency that belies your tender years. You are drilled in horseback riding, in sword fighting, in the art of diplomacy, not as hobbies, but as essential skills for survival in a dangerous world. You are taught to hide your emotions, to analyze every gesture, every word spoken in your presence, to search for hidden meanings and veiled threats. The innocent curiosity of a child is slowly, systematically replaced by the calculating gaze of a sovereign. But you are still just a child, internalizing this immense burden, often without truly understanding its full implications, only sensing the immense pressure. And then there is the matter of your future, which is never truly yours to decide. You are betrothed, often while still in infancy, to a foreign princess or prince, a person you have never met, whose language you may not speak, whose customs are alien to you. Your marriage is a treaty, a political alliance, a means to secure your kingdom's borders or a powerful ally against a common enemy. You are a pawn in a larger game, your personal happiness and desires utterly secondary to the needs of the state. You are ripped from what little comfort you know, sent to a new land, a new court, to marry a stranger, all before you have even fully understood the meaning of love or companionship, before you have experienced the simple joy of choosing a friend. You are a sacrifice offered up for the sake of the crown you bear. Every public appearance is a performance. You must sit still for hours during ceremonies, your small face carefully composed, your hands resting just so, your back perfectly straight. Your processions through the streets are not joyous occasions for you. They are moments of intense vulnerability. You are paraded before your subjects, a living icon, and you see the faces in the crowd. Some adoring, some curious, some impassive, and you wonder which ones hide dissent, which ones harbor ill will, which ones might throw a stone or shout an insult. You are the physical embodiment of the kingdom, and your very appearance, your health, your bearing, can be interpreted as a sign of the kingdom's strength or weakness. There is no escape from the watchful eyes, no moment when you are truly just a child. Beyond the human machinations, the invisible enemy lurks with relentless patience. You are still a child, susceptible to the same fevers, the same plagues that sweep through the common folk, perhaps even more so within the confined, often unsanitary walls of a medieval palace. The death of a royal infant or child was a common tragedy, even with the best physicians available, even with the most fervent prayers offered. A cough, a fever, a sudden chill could mean the end not just of a life, but of a dynasty, plunging the kingdom into yet another brutal succession crisis. Your physical fragility is a constant source of anxiety for those who depend on your survival, a weakness to be hidden and protected at all costs, yet one that often proved impossible to overcome. And what of the kingdom itself, under the nominal rule of a child? It is a ship often adrift in stormy seas. Internal factions can tear it apart, leading to devastating civil wars as nobles exploit your youth for their own gain. Neighbors, seeing an opportunity, might launch invasions, eager to snatch territory from a realm perceived as weak and leaderless. The economy can falter, justice can be corrupted, and the general populace can suffer immensely while the adults squabble for control in your name. You are the symbol of unity, but your very existence as a child on the throne often sparks the deepest divisions, creating a power vacuum that ambitious men rush to fill. You are a symbol, but a symbol easily manipulated, a flag to be waved in a war that is not your own. This is the world of the child king, stripped of its romantic veneer. It is a world of constant peril, immense pressure, and profound loneliness. You are not merely a figurehead. You are a hostage of your own birth, a pawn in a deadly game played by adults who see only power, not a precious, vulnerable life. Your childhood is sacrificed on the altar of duty and destiny, a destiny that often ends abruptly and violently, long before you ever have a chance to truly rule in your own name. You are left with an undeniable truth, a profound quietness that follows these brief, tumultuous reigns. The echoes of their struggles, the whispers of their fates, do not simply fade into the dust of forgotten centuries. Instead, they linger, a persistent hum beneath the grand narratives of empires and battles. This enduring hush is not the silence of erasure, but the quiet resonance of deeply human stories, tales that seem to defy the very idea of being forgotten, even if they often reside in the shadowed corners of history. Why do these specific narratives persist? Why do we, centuries removed, still find ourselves drawn to the silent struggles of children who sat on thrones, their destinies woven into the tapestry of nations? It is not always the thunderous battles or the earth-shattering decrees that capture our collective imagination. Sometimes, it is the quiet tragedy, the profound injustice, or the sheer vulnerability of a life thrust into unimaginable power that etches itself deepest into the human psyche. Imagine yourself in a vast, echoing hall, perhaps the remains of a castle where a child once held court. The air is still, thick with the weight of time. You might picture a small figure on a colossal throne, dwarfed by the heavy robes of state, their eyes perhaps wide with a mixture of fear and forced solemnity. This image, stark and poignant, transcends the specific details of any single kingdom or era. It speaks to something universal within us, the fragility of innocence in the face of ruthless ambition, the terrifying burden of responsibility placed upon unwilling, unprepared shoulders. These tales whisper because they are cautionary. They serve as timeless warnings about the corrupting nature of power, the dangers of regency, and the inherent instability of a state reliant on the fragile life of a child. You see the patterns repeat across different cultures and continents. The ambitious uncle, the scheming minister, the foreign power eager to exploit weakness. The narratives may change in their specifics, but the underlying human motivations remain strikingly consistent. You are witnessing not just historical events, but a timeless drama playing out on a grand stage, with real and often tragic consequences. They whisper too because they challenge our notions of leadership and authority. We are accustomed to images of strong, decisive rulers, figures of experience and wisdom. To contemplate a child in such a position forces you to confront the very essence of what it means to govern. Is it merely heredity? Is it the symbolic power of the crown regardless of who wears it? Or does true leadership demand a maturity that these young monarchs simply could not possess? The stories of child kings compel you to ask these fundamental questions, probing the core of political legitimacy and the nature of sovereignty. Consider the chroniclers, the monks, the court historians who first set these stories down. They wrote not merely for their contemporaries but for posterity. Perhaps they were motivated by a sense of moral duty, to record the injustices, the manipulations, the quiet suffering they witnessed. Or perhaps they simply understood the dramatic power of such a narrative, a child's fate entwined with an entire kingdom. You can almost feel the scratch of the quill on parchment, the careful shaping of words designed to preserve a memory, however uncomfortable or inconvenient that memory might be. Their efforts, sometimes undertaken in secret or under duress, ensure that these tales, though perhaps subdued, continue to resonate. The hush also endures because these histories highlight a unique form of loneliness. You can empathize with the isolation of a child surrounded by adults who see them not as a person, but as a tool, a symbol, a means to an end. Picture a lavish chamber, rich with tapestries and ornate furniture, yet utterly devoid of genuine warmth or companionship. There is no one to truly play with, no one to confide in, only advisors, guards, and conspirators. This profound isolation, this enforced maturity without true understanding, creates a narrative of quiet pathos that speaks across the centuries. It is a form of gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but stifling and dangerous within. Moreover, these narratives often touch upon profound questions of identity. Who are you as a child king? Are you a boy playing games, dreaming dreams? Or are you the living embodiment of a nation, your person indistinguishable from the state? This blurring of personal and public self, so early in life, creates a psychological complexity that is both fascinating and heartbreaking. You are not allowed the luxury of a private self. Your every action, every word, every gesture, is imbued with political significance. This forced performance of kingship, often without comprehension, leaves a lasting impression. These whispers also reach us through the physical remnants of their reigns. You might stand before a faded portrait in a forgotten gallery, a young face staring out, eyes full of an unsettling knowingness or perhaps just confusion. You might trace the lines of a small signature on an ancient document, a hand attempting to assert authority it barely understood. These artifacts are not just historical curiosities, they are tangible connections to those brief, poignant lives. They are reminders that these were not abstract figures, but flesh and blood individuals, however short and controlled their existences may have been. Each painting, each inscription, each surviving piece of clothing or toy, is a tiny thread that prevents the fabric of their story from completely unraveling. The very concept of a child king is, in itself, an anachronism to our modern sensibilities. In an age that prioritizes childhood as a distinct and protected phase of life, the idea of a child burdened with absolute power feels both alien and deeply unsettling. This contrast between our contemporary understanding of youth and the harsh realities of historical monarchies creates a powerful lens through which you view these tales. It magnifies the tragedy, making the vulnerability of these young rulers all the more stark and impactful. You cannot help but project modern empathy onto their ancient plights, making their whispers louder in your own heart. Perhaps the hush is enduring because it represents a truth about power itself. that it often consumes regardless of the vessel. Whether the ruler is old and wise or young and naive, the mechanisms of power, the intrigues, the betrayals, the struggles for control remain constant. The child king simply serves as an extreme, almost theatrical, example of this universal dynamic. Their story therefore becomes a miniature of all power struggles, stripped down to its most fundamental and often brutal elements. It is a microcosm of human ambition and its often devastating consequences, regardless of who sits upon the throne. The tales whisper because they are inherently paradoxical. A child, the very symbol of innocence and future potential, holds the ultimate authority, yet is utterly without agency. This contradiction creates a narrative tension that is inherently compelling. You are drawn to the incongruity, to the tragic irony of their situation. The crown, a symbol of strength and might, rests on a head that is still growing, still learning, still dreaming of simple pleasures. This dramatic irony ensures that their stories, once told, are difficult to dislodge from memory. Ultimately, these narratives offer a profound insight into the human condition. They speak to our collective fascination with destiny, with the arbitrary nature of birth, and with the relentless march of history. They remind you that even the most obscure or seemingly boring corners of the past are teeming with rich human drama, with lives lived under extraordinary circumstances. The child kings in their gilded cages and on their oversized thrones represent a unique intersection of vulnerability and immense power, a crossroads where childhood ends abruptly and an unwanted, often deadly, adulthood begins. Their legacy is not found in grand conquests or long, prosperous reigns. Instead, it is found in the persistent quiet of their stories. It is found in the empathy they evoke, in the questions they provoke, and in the enduring lessons they offer about the nature of power, sacrifice, and the often brutal realities of history. You may not hear their names shouted in every history book, but if you listen closely, if you open yourself to the more subtle echoes of the past, you will hear their whispers. They are the quiet, insistent reminders of a unique kind of sacrifice, a profound loss of self for the sake of a crown, a kingdom, a name that would, in many cases, barely be remembered. Their stories are not loud, but they are deep, resonating with a truth that transcends time. And in that quiet resonance, in that enduring hush, they find their true, immortal voice.